And good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Zoning Board of Adjustment for March 16th. Very good. Night before St. Patrick's Day. So would you please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, welcome everybody, and before we proceed, allow us to introduce ourselves, starting from my far left, please. And that was Mr. Tripp.
You turned yourself.
We have a power problem.
Rookie mistake.
Good evening, Richard Tripp.
Good evening.
Nope, yours isn't on either. No, Doodle.
Michael Donlin.
Gaspar Bimba.
Crystal Morin, Secretary.
Lynn Perkins, Chair.
Craig Corbett, Vice Chair.
Alan Burr, member. Donald Burgess, member.
And we do have Robert Mackey is with us from Code Enforcement, as he normally is, and our clerk, Ginny Rio, is in the back, and she will be taking the minutes evening. We have one case on the agenda tonight, so I'll be actually before that, just in the event of an emergency, please exit to the rear of the room and don't use the elevator. Someone will get to you. These proceedings are audio-video recorded and scheduled to terminate by 10 p.m. Did I forget something there? Mr. Burgess, you always catch me.
Bones?
I'm sorry? Phones, that's right. Phones, yes. Not bones, but phones.
Don't
Please
take the
shut your
elevator
phones down, any iPods, iPhones, iPads, anything that could create a distraction to the proceedings. And with that, thank you for the reminder, Mr. Burgess, and let us proceed. We have a continuation of case number 23-103, which was Peter Miller and Elizabeth Kuo. And Mr. Miller, is that you? Yeah. Come right up and have a seat here. And whereas we've had an extended recess since we originally heard the case or started the testimony, I'll give you an opportunity to bring anything forward. I'm sure you've watched your wife's testimony, and bring any points forward that you think are pertinent before we proceed. And understanding that when we left off, we were basically ready to take public input off of the testimony. You'll have an opportunity to rebut any of the comments that are made, and then we'll see what happens after that. But please proceed.
Great, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. My name is Peter Miller. I'm one of the owners of the property in question. My wife, Elizabeth Kuo, presented our case last time. I apologize, I wasn't able to be there. And of course, tonight, one of our daughters is sick, and so my wife is not able to be here. I am speaking on behalf of both of us, and I apologize for her absence. I also apologize for the delay in continuing this case. We've had some family health issues, and your agreement to allow us to forego the decision or the furtherance of this case until today is very much appreciated. I just wanted to clarify as we move forward in terms of our request for a variance specifically for the terms in Article 6 of Section 16548.A. As you stated, my wife, Liz, she presented the case last time. I'll ask you honestly, I don't want to take up too much of your time, excess time, given that she presented things. I don't want to restate everything that she presented. I don't have anything specifically to add to what she stated related to the variance, the variance itself, the request for the variance, and the reasons that we believe that it would be appropriate to have a variance, namely through the public interests, in terms of how we feel that this brings value to the town of Derry, to the surrounding properties through multiple mechanisms, including clientele for businesses, property values, investment in property, and precedents related to allowing this as a source of income for other members of the community who may seek to pursue similar short-term rentals, and that we do believe that the spirit of the ordinance has been very much observed in our attempts to promote our case for a variance, and we feel like the core core of this rule was really based to try to prevent a transitory population that would impede on the local community and decrease the value of the community, both financially and personally, in a way that we feel that we are not doing in our attempts for short-term rental. She stated our case for substantial justice as outlined previously, and very much so that the surrounding property values are not diminished. In fact, we feel very strongly that our purchase of the property, our use of the property, our heavy investment in the property, and our ongoing investment actually increases the property values around our area. I'd just like to re-emphasize again, related to the issue of hardship, that we've had to put in more than $200,000 into the property in various capacities, given the unforeseen and unknown problems with the property at the time of the purchase. And in so doing, again, reiterate our commitment to the property, our commitment to the community, and our investment in the property, and the value that it brings to the surrounding properties as well, and to the town of Derry. The last thing I'll just say is that I realize that in terms of the question of the variance specifically in this case, it is not a question of whether or not the decision that's reached in this particular case creates a precedent for the entire town of Derry. I understand that is not what is at play. However, I will just reiterate the fact that the use of short-term rentals is a very common mechanism by many members of the community in order to provide a second form of important income, and that this is common around Derry generally, and specifically around the property in question. In fact, around Big Island Pond, if you go right now online, there are 4 other properties specifically on Big Island Pond, abutting Big Island Pond, as our property is as well, which are listed on Airbnb. I understand, again, that the case tonight is not an adjudication of those other properties, nor is it an adjudication of the value of the law in general, but I do want to reiterate that point, that this is not a unique case to us, and that the claims that I feel that we are making that justify the request for a variance are also at play in terms of larger issues throughout the community and throughout the state of New Hampshire. Again, thank you very much for the opportunity to present our case. I look forward to hearing the concerns raised by abutters, and I would be happy to address any questions raised by members of the board or members of the community that I can do to the best of my ability. Thank you.
I think one of the things that I started off with Elizabeth Quo was the point that different communities nationwide have expressed issues relative to Airbnbs, and she concurred with that. I think your hometown of Cambridge is one that really stands out in my mind as far as how they've had to handle Airbnbs. And there's been similar anecdotes across the nation. This state deals with it because it's a whole different monster or beast, I guess, is a good phrase. Nothing disparaging in regarding that phrase, by the way, but it's just a whole different animal, right?
Sure. Yeah.
It's undermining tax revenues, circumventing hotels, motels, where the intentions for that zoning are established specifically because of transient and non-permanent residents or residents that are vested in the community, but versus just visiting or passing through. And I think that those were points that were highlighted here. And I think that those points that I'm capturing, as well as, well, primarily the disturbance, is what's brought your case before us now. And so I just wanted to put some background to that. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Miller at this time?
I don't have a question, but I want to touch base on the 4 Airbnb. They are not at Big Island Pond, because I was just on Airbnb. There are 4 in Derry, but they're not at Big Island Pond. They're on Beaver Lake.
Thank you, Ms. Moran. I was on today. I'd be happy to pull up my computer and show you. Is that something that I'm allowed to do? Is that or not? Because I can pull it up right now. I'll tell you specifically for the purpose of the minutes. If you put in search term Derry, New Hampshire, if you put in flexible dates, weekends, you put in March, April, and May, and then you zoom in around Big Island Pond, there's 5 properties. There's our property. There's a property that is northeast of us. There's a property that is northwest of us. There's a property that is directly east of us. There's a property, and there are 2 properties that are northeast of us. In total, 5 properties that, if you zoom in with those terms, weekend, flexible dates, March, April, May, are currently listed as of 4 p.m. today.
That's about the time I saw Big Beaver Lake, so I'm not sure.
Okay, but I'd be happy to bring it up if that would be helpful. Again, yeah.
Well, in disseminating the point, right? My last comment is that the reason that you're here is just because of a disturbance that occurred, and it brought things into light. I think when your wife was here, she had indicated there was 820 in Derry, right?
Correct, and that was based off of my. If you just put in a search term, when I did it at the time, I just write Derry, New Hampshire, not realizing that in doing it also collects from surrounding areas. So that was a fault of mine, not hers, and I know that was clarified down to 16 properties.
Yeah, and so I understand that. I would imagine that some of the members of the board also understand that as well. But the key is what we deal with as infractions that come to light through disturbances or specific things that we can put our thumbs on, or our fingers on, correct? And understand that this board is not the enforcement side of it, but it is the judicious side of the matter. And so that's the relevance that we're focused on at this time, and not whether or not we need to go out and start searching for others and use that as to weigh the decision on your matter.
And I do appreciate that point, and I want to clearly state that I in no way feel that this is a forum to adjudicate that larger issue, and nor do I intend to do so. I will say that, for the purposes of this meeting tonight, obviously this is a new experience for my wife and I. We've never sat in front of a board like this before, and I do appreciate the guidance that we've gotten from Mr. Mackey and others in this process. And as part of this process, having members of the community speak for and against the different cases presented, I will say that there was a consideration by my wife and I as to whether or not we should reach out to other members of the community who may be, similarly utilizing this mechanism for income purposes. We chose not to do so for a number of reasons, including the fact that the point of this is not, nor should it be, to try to find people who are also potentially using Airbnb in a way that's not, that some people think is not consistent with the rules. And so I will say that we have intentionally decided not to ask other people here so as to not highlight for or put them under any sort of microscope in their use of this mechanism as well. And I think that obviously is reflected in terms of the members of the community are here and what I anticipate their positions will be.
Okay. Let me yield to anybody else on the board that wishes to ask questions. Mrs. Moran, are you all set? Or?
I do have a couple questions. You stated for substantial justice that your renters are going to be fully vetted. How do you plan on fully vetting them?
They're vetted in the sense that they've gone through the process through Airbnb in terms of their ability to pay for it. There's no background checks in terms of criminal records, and the vetting process would be similar to the vetting that would be done for an institution like a motel, a hotel, a bed and breakfast. I think maybe some of the terminology that Elizabeth used in her use of the word vetting may not have been accurate in the way that you're saying, and I think what you're getting at is, are we doing something to actively ensure that people who are renting the property don't have criminal records or don't have a history of disturbances or having problems? And I would say that we do not engage in that beyond the policies that Airbnb provides. It would not be beyond what a hotel or bed and breakfast would do. But what I think one of the points that we were trying to convey, which may not have been done so clearly, and my apologies if that's the case, is that out of sort of consideration for the community, we've also decided we created it at a price point where we felt like there would be a limited number of people who would be engaging in the use of the property, so as to not have it constantly being used and to be used in a way that we didn't want it to be.
So the price point part, that can be subjective. What is expensive to you
100%.
may not be to somebody else.
Correct.
And with a hotel, motel, you have someone there looking at an ID, checking them in, assuring that that is the person that is going to be there. When they check in or out, are you guys there?
You're not there.
Okay. I think that's all I have for right now, Chair.
Just building off of that, does Airbnb have a process in their system that they do this? And I guess in one aspect, if somebody does something that is criminally foul, what's the recourse to find that person? Is there an identification tracking or anything like
That's
that?
an excellent question. I don't know the answer to that question. I do not know. I do know that by virtue of it's required that they have a credit card on file. There are specific penalties that can be placed on people who rent if there's damage to the property that is reported to Airbnb, and that can be recourse through that mechanism, presumably through the credit card. But in terms of specific legality, in terms of specific liability, I do not know what the policies are.
Okay.
I will say, we have, from our perspective, we have, insurance and umbrella insurance and things like that. But in terms of if somebody rents the property and does something that results in a diminution of value or something to surrounding properties, I don't know what the specific mechanism within Airbnb is for that.
I've never used an Airbnb, but my children enlightened me as to the process, as I think Mrs.
My
Moran
kids
has
did.
indicated as well, so I don't know.
And I would say that also, if I may, that, I don't know how different it is if, my friend says, could I use the property this weekend? And my friend came and something happened, my recourse, or in that situation, I know the person. And so I do want to reiterate, I would also state that anytime somebody uses the property, the fact that it's being done under a transactional purpose is in a way no different in the sense of vetting. If you had a friend of a friend who said, could I use the place? Yeah, this is my friend's friend. If they say they're okay, then it's okay with me. I know it's not the same thing, but I wouldn't necessarily consider the fact that there's a financial transaction that you would hold a standard that would be significantly different than if you're letting a friend stay at your place or something like that.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Corbett.
So, if I may, Mr. Miller, just looking through the Airbnb site, they do have a section on what goes into the background check. They will perform a background check based off the first and last name of whoever is applying for the Airbnb, and then they do have a list of offenses depending on the type of crime. If it's a lesser crime, if it's an actual crime, whether or not they will allow the person to move forward with their rental. So it does seem Airbnb has does have some checks in place. I mean, there's always a way around that. You could go for me or vice versa, but it does seem a website puts something in there.
Okay, very good. Mr. Ver?
No, I think
Mr. Burgess?
I'm all set.
No, not at this time.
All right, let's go back down to the left, Mr. Tripp.
So obviously you rent your property through Airbnb. And now, do they do any checking as to the ordinances and stuff in towns to find out if this is something that's permitted?
They don't care.
Not to my knowledge.
No. And apparently you didn't check to see if this was a permitted use either.
At the time that we purchased the property, we were under the impression, based off of what we were told from not a legal counsel, but from the real estate agent, that it was fine to rent and that there were multiple places that rented. And we went online at the time and confirmed that there were multiple properties in Derry that rented. However, we did not engage with a lawyer or somebody who was intimately knowledge with the town code in order to confirm that. We did it through what we were told by our real estate agent and by what we observed through different websites that rent.
So you made some good effort. There's another question I had. Let me think if I can remember it.
Sure.
You said that you went online this afternoon to look for properties that are similar to yours.
Yeah.
Did you found them using your search term? Did you take another step and find out if they actually are rented out?
Meaning, have they ever rented or at the time, like?
Yeah, if they've ever been rented out by, say, Airbnb.
Oh, yeah. So if you go online to these properties and you click on the properties, you can see prior reviews of people who've stayed there.
And it would, oh, all right. So you wouldn't know if it was Airbnb, but it would.
Well, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. You can answer my question. I think you understand.
Yeah, so on the Airbnb website, these are reviews left by Airbnb users of the specific property.
Yeah.
So by definition, those people would have stayed at those properties via the Airbnb mechanism.
All right. Well, I might have some further questions, but not right now.
Very good. I think Mr. Corbett wants.
Yeah, Mr. Miller, just looking at uses of the house, prior to going into the Airbnb route or the short-term rental, did you guys ever look into long-term rentals or just using the house for that type of use? Or
Have we looked into it, meaning have we actively tried to engage people to rent the house in a long-term?
Yeah, or kind of had that discussion for any reason?
Not yet. Not yet.
Anything else, Mr. Corbett?
Mr. Chair, not this time.
All right, let me work down the line. Mr. Obimba?
No question, just an addition to the point Vice Chair made on how Airbnb does the vetting. I am an avid user of Airbnb. I just got off one that I was there for 2 months. They do impose serious financial penalties if you do violate certain terms and the renter reports you and the case is verified. You can be banned or prosecuted in the country in which you committed if it's a crime. And the renters can also be banned from that platform. I think now it includes other rental companies that kind of share the same background data. So they somehow have some way of vetting who stays or who rents their property.
Okay, very good. Mr. Donlin, anything?
Not right now, Mr. Chair.
All right, Mr. Dietzel?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, very good. If no one else has any other questions, we can go to public. Mr. Ver, you all set?
Yeah, I just wanted to make the comment that the problem that I see that we face is that if we approve your use of Airbnb as the means of scheduling people to stay at your property, then we are making zoning laws, because it doesn't say that Airbnb can do that in the town of Derry, particularly in the zone in which you are located. So that's one of the problems that we face, that if we go ahead and approve your application, that kind of puts us in a position that we are drafting our own zoning laws and putting them into effect. So.
Very good. Thank you. Everybody else all set? All right, Mr. Miller, our protocol would be to have you step back, and we'll take opportunity for folks to speak on behalf or oppose your application.
Will I have the opportunity to respond to Mr. Ver after?
By all means.
I don't know.
No, you can. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. You are welcome.
No, I just want to make sure I understood, and I'm not a lawyer, so and you obviously have far more experience in understanding this process than I do. I would just say that as far as I understand the process, what we're seeking is a variance from the law. So by definition, the decision to grant a variance, as far as I understand, it doesn't actually change the law. It doesn't change the rule. What it does is it says, in this specific case, there is a variance to the rule that's in place. I understand also the point that you're driving at, and again, maybe it's my misunderstanding of the legal situation here, and maybe it certainly could be perceived as a precedent issue, which I would I would argue that one, that precedent is not the same as actually changing the rule of the law, and I understand that the point here is not to change the rule of the law, or the role of this body is not to actually change the letter of the law, at least in this capacity. And the second thing I would say is related to related to what we were discussing before, is that while I can get up here honestly and say there's 16 other properties in Derry and it's not fair, why us? I'm not going to do that because I know that that is not a defense for a variance for our property. I'm just trying to raise the issue that this is an issue that is obviously something at the forefront of many people's minds in the community. And I would say similarly, just like using other people's property is not a justification for us to be able to get a variance, I would also argue the inverse is true, that granting us a variance doesn't necessitate a precedent for other people who may seek a variance in the future. Now, if the law were to change that would explicitly allow or disallow that explicitly to Airbnb or any other mechanism of which there are others, then I think that would be a different issue. But my understanding is that a decision tonight would not actually change the zoning law, nor would it create a precedent that requires future renters who apply for a variance to be granted one.
And your point on that is accurate in a lot of ways, that one approval is not a precedent for the other. But I think on Mr. Ver's point, in some regards, this board were to grant this as it is a different animal. We step ahead of the planning board and the legislative and body that would approve or not some of the ordinance changes before they were vetted. So that's kind of what this board is walking out on the plank, is whether or not we wish to do that or have that means to take that step.
Understood. But wouldn't that be true for any variance that's granted? If there's a variance because you wanted to build a garage that's too close to, you know, whatever it may be, a wilderness or something, you could say, well, if we granted this variance, what if the town in a year from now decided that they wanted to change the law that it has to be 10 feet away to, 5 feet away? We're getting ahead. So again, I think, and I understand that the question of the variance here is as it relates to the law as of March 16th, 2023, with the clear understanding, as we all agree upon, that this is an issue that is going to be hopefully addressed by many communities across the country, including Derry. But in terms of the specific question to date, I'm not sure that a variance about the law here necessarily means that a variance should not be considered because it's going to preclude or get ahead of what a future rule change may or may not be.
Yes, in the idea that this board is essentially a relief valve, as Mr. Ver has put it decades ago. If you look at hardship, you have an area and a use variance there that's being described. So, different applications represent different things, and they also represent different avenues of consideration depending on that geographic makeup. And the geographic makeup, a lot of times, is really what the key is under the hardship script, which is not how much you've had to invest in it, but what the challenges are and why you can't use the property for its intended use.
Understood. And I appreciate that. And again, this is a learning process for me. So if I am saying things that are incorrect, I would appreciate you clarifying it like this. So thank you.
The civil debate is not an issue, and we have till 10 o'clock tonight.
Mr. Chair, if I may, just for Mr. Ver, or to Mr. Ver's point, one way to look at it, it's not necessarily that laws are being rewritten or the precedent that's going to come with it, but rather when you look at the ordinances that we have permissive ones where it specifically states what is allowed in each jurisdiction. And when it was written, I don't think Airbnb was really a thing at the time for somebody to think of and specifically state there is no Airbnb, but rather when they state what's allowed in the district, you see that it can be a single family house, that it can be an accessory apartment or a campground. We specifically said what would be allowed. So now it's looking of, does an Airbnb, which you could kind of deem more of a hotel, motel, transient type of lodging, does that fit in what's permitted? So I don't think that there's really any rewriting of the laws. I think it's just open for interpretation of what's allowed in the area.
Anybody follow up? You all set? Oh, Mr. Burgess?
No, I'm good.
Oh,
Just
okay.
clear my throat.
All right, good enough. Okay, well, let's take public input then, Mr. Miller, and yes, you will have an opportunity to rebut. So, all right, so we'll make a call to the public, and we'll also, we'll go to the remote avenue as well. Mr. Corby, you have some phone numbers, can you help entertain us with that?
Yes, anybody at home who wishes to dial in, please dial 646-558-8656. Your meeting ID is 323-909-140, and then press *9 to raise your hand. If you're having any technical issues, please dial 603-845-5585, and somebody will help you.
Very good, thank you. So that, those phone numbers apply to both any avenue of, anyone remotely would like to speak to either avenue of the for or against on this application, and at this point, we'll make the call officially to this room, which is anybody that wishes to speak in favor of this application. This would be your opportunity to come forward now. And seeing no one rise and no gestures there, Mr. Provencher, you have anybody out there remotely that has pressed *9 and wants to come into this?
Seeing none rise at this time.
All right, very good. So in this next step, we'll call who's in opposition to this application. This would be your time to come forward and make your piece known. And that call goes remotely as well. If you want, if anybody out there would like to queue in, we'll fit you in order.
Chair,
And we could, yes.
I just, with Mr. Miller's help, I did find something on Big Island Pond. I just want, if you do flexible dates, you can find some.
Okay, very good.
And I have a coupon code.
All right, all right. Good evening, sir. We can have your name and address, please.
Yes, excuse me. My name is Ken Hepworth, and I live with my wife Jackie at 71 Conleys Grove Road in Derry. I am a direct abutter and
Is the
neighbor.
microphone on?
Yeah, I don't think the microphone's on.
I think turning it up.
You all set, Mr. Provencher?
Green light on.
Not close enough?
Okay,
You could just ensure a little closer proximity.
Oh, okay.
there you go.
Oh, that's the other thing, yeah.
Give us the Frank Sinatra treatment.
Again, my name is Ken Hepworth, and I live with my wife Jackie, who's sitting behind me, at 71 Conleys Grove Road in Derry. I am a direct abutter and neighbor to the Quo Miller home at 69 Conleys Grove Road. With our homes being physically separated from each other by only 13 feet. The foundation of my house and the foundation of the Quos are separated only by 13 feet. So we're a very special kind of neighbor, being that close to a proposed short-term rental. I plan to show tonight that each of the 5 variance criteria are not met, and I'm going to provide 5 separate discussions. I'm going to go through reasons why each of the 5 are not met. But before I start those discussions, I would like you to be aware of 2 things. The yearly number of people and vehicles that are going to use this short-term rental, I'm going to go through some statistics that will probably boggle your mind. And then the second thing I want to go through is the closeness of our home to the Quo Miller's short-term rental. So I'll go through those 2 things. Go through the statistics first. There's 3 statistics that I'd like to talk about. The possible number of 2-night rentals, they have a minimum of 2-night rentals. So the possible number of 2-night rentals in a week could be 3. They could have 3 2-night rentals in 1 week. The number of 2-night rentals in a year could be the 3 times 52. You could have 156 2-night rentals in a year. And the number of possible occupants or renters in a year could be the 156 2-night rentals times they allow 10 people per rental. So 156 rentals per year times 10 people per rental means there could be 1,560 people staying next door to me over a course of a year. Now, those numbers I just gave you represent a scenario that is theoretically possible, but in actuality, it would never happen, because I'm telling you that it's going to be rented all the time, 2 nights, 2 nights, 2 nights. That's not the case. I fully realize that the actual numbers at the end of a year will probably be far less than 1,560. Each of the 156 rental groups, I call them groups, might arrive in 3 vehicles. There might be 3 people. If you have 10 people, they probably come in 3 vehicles. This results in 468 vehicles a year. Okay. Thinking of this rental on a yearly basis concerning people and vehicles makes you really think and want to ask the following question. Do we really want this many people and this many vehicles to be associated with one home in the low-density residential zone? Okay, next I'd like to go to how physically close we are to the Millers, Crow Millers. I'd like to put up my first photograph, please.
Oh, it's right here. Let me think. Maybe it comes up. There we go.
Okay. The Quo Miller's home, they have 2 lots. The Quo Miller, the right directly in front of you, that big tall white building, and then there's a little addition in front of it, and then there's the garage. That's the lot 1 of the Quo Millers. And then to the right, the second lot, you see some trees there and you see some cars. That is their second lot. And then behind there is the lake, Big Island Pond. My home is directly to the left of the Quo Millers. It's that place with the truck and the garage and so forth. And then to the far right, to the right of the Millers, go all the way over, is the Allen's home. Not that one, to the left a little bit. No, right there.
There you go.
That's the Allens' home. The Allens are here tonight, and I believe are going to also speak against this variance. Go to the next slide.
Could we ask a question?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Tripp.
Sure.
There seems to be a number of cars.
I've got, okay, for
Do you
each
know
of
whose
these.
cars those are?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Some of them.
I said, on the picture, there seems to be a number of cars. Could you let me know whose cars those are? Do you know?
Yes. Well, I don't know the actual people.
So I think we're presuming that these are people staying at this location.
I know, I'm trying to confirm that.
Okay.
Well, I was going to just briefly go through these, and then I'm going to come back to these. I'm
All
going to
right.
come back to each of these photos.
I'll be
and give you
quiet then.
comments,
I'll be
okay?
quiet then.
And it will answer your question. This photo here, our Hepworth home is to the left, and the Quo Miller home is to the right. Big Island Pond straight ahead of you, and some islands out there you see. Anyway, that fence is the dividing line between our 2 properties. There's about 6.5 feet from our home to the fence, and then another 6.5 feet to the Miller's home, Quo Miller's, for a total of 13 feet. Okay, and I'm going to come back later and give you comments on this diagram later. Like the next diagram put up, please. Okay, this photo, our home is on, the Hepworth home is on the right, the Quo Miller on the left. And just take a look at those numbers, because I'm trying to convince you that our homes are too close together. So 6.5 feet from where our screened-in porch is, I sleep there at night in the summers. My head is right up at the end, and I'm only 6.5 feet from their fence, and a total of 15 feet from their screened-in porch. So I'm going to have lots of comments about these 3 diagrams later. Okay. I have 4 or 5 comments to make for each of the 3 photos. Okay, I've already said that. Now I would like to talk about the variance criteria. I'm going to go through each of the 5 criteria, starting with property value. My position is that the variance will
diminish our property value for the following 4 reasons. Reason number 1, there are certain expectations a potential buyer has when considering a home in the low-density residential zone. One of those expectations is not to have a short-term rental 13 feet away. One of those expectations, the buyer's expectations are also not to experience the significant adverse impacts that the Hepworths are already experiencing. It's been an Airbnb for 8 months. We're already experiencing what I call significant adverse impacts. And significant adverse impacts is a term that means a lot concerning substantial justice, which I'll get into later also. For those reasons, our property value has already diminished due to the short-term rental being in operation for 8 months. Number 2, the existing short-term rental is operating without any on-site management and supervision. And as Mr. Miller said, that there isn't, you don't check in with it. There's no one there to make sure the rules are followed or anything like that. A potential buyer would not want to put up with these rule infractions, and therefore our property value has diminished in value. The third reason, in general, a long-term residential buyer would not like to have neighbors who the buyer would get to know and trust. So somebody buying our home, they'd like to have neighbors next door that they get to know, maybe trust. We've had neighbors that we've owned our home for 11 years, and we get to know our neighbors, and you get to trust them, you know their living habits, you know, and you just do it. Well, so at that time, before the Airbnb, it was a neighbor-to-neighbor situation, and not a neighbor-to-short-term rental situation. Over the years, with the help and cooperation of our neighbors, we have been able to cope with the situation until August of this year. In August of this year, it became a short-term rental. At that time, the enjoyment of our home started to be substantially reduced, and the value of our property also started to be diminished, all due to living alongside a short-term rental. A friend of mine, who I recently explained this property value criteria to, said to me, "I wouldn't want to buy your house." Talk about property value going down. There's a person that seemed to know what he was talking about. He said, "I wouldn't want to buy your house because you're just too close." We knew when we, okay. We'll go to the next, concerning the public interest. I have 4 or 5 reasons why this property is not in the public interest. So, a variance will be contrary to the public interest for the following 5 reasons. Reason 1, many more unknown and not yet trusted individuals will be roaming the streets of our Conleys Grove Road community. This is not in the public interest. Over the course of a year, I mentioned a very high number, 1,500. Most of the people in our community, it's a tight-knit community. Neighbor trust has built up, and everyone knows or knows of their neighbors. Community gatherings and emails to each other are not uncommon. So now we're going to have all these people that maybe only going to be there 2 days, some could be there longer, I'm sure. But they're going to be walking around the neighborhood and we won't know them, and it's just a very different environment if this happens. The second reason that it's not in the public interest is it increases the closeness hardship for the Hepworths. This is not in the public interest. I'm going to talk about later what this closeness is all about. I mean, you can, just by looking at that photograph up there, you can sort of feel what the problems are that relate to being this close. If we were 200 feet away or something like that, a lot of what I'm going to say tonight would go away. But they're right on top of us. We knew it when we bought it, but things are changing. Number 3, the reason that it's not in the public interest. The short-term rental decreases the probability for police services related to fights, drinking, drugs, parties, noise rule violations, etc. We've had a lot of these things happen already. The police haven't come yet, but I'm sure they're going to come. This is not in the public interest. Number 4, this short-term rental increases the probability for traffic accidents on Waters Edge Road and Conleys Grove Road due to the major increase in vehicle traffic due to the short-term renters and their visitors. This is not in public interest. Our road, if you've ever driven in there, our roads don't meet the specification for road width, and it's dangerous. And there's about 3 or 4 big S-turns there. And the number of, I said there was going to be an increase of like 400 vehicles over a year. Well, or when a renter comes in with 10 people, they're probably going to have a couple of cars. They don't know the roads. They don't know when to stop and start. It's very dangerous. My last reason for it's not in the public interest is it encourages other Conleys Grove homes to consider changing their use from residential use to short-term rental use. Let me just say one thing here. I almost thought to myself, well, if they can get a variance, why wouldn't I go and try to get a variance and just keep it in my back pocket, have the variance in my back pocket, and when, I'm 82 years old now, I'm not going to be around, maybe when I die, my daughters can turn it, they will already have a variance if I apply for it, they could use it as a short-term rental.
Good point.
Okay, concerning hardship, go on to the next one. The Hepworth response to hardship is as follows. There is no hardship. My understanding is it's supposed to be a hardship of land, but it is the Hepworth's opinion, therefore, that there is no hardship of land. And I think this was brought up on January 19th, too, that they haven't proven any hardship of land. Concerning substantial justice, the Hepworth response is substantial justice is not done by granting this variance due to 2 reasons. The significant adverse impact it will have on the Hepworths. And I'm going to explain all those impacts a little bit later, but they're significant. We've experienced them for the past 8 months, and if this passes, we're going to experience them over and over again because of the many rentals that keep coming. People are coming and going, and we don't know who they are. We never get to really know them and trust them. We don't get to trust them yet. Okay, and the second one is one that I think you're probably used to. The harm done to the coal millers does not outweigh the gains to the public. The harm to the coal millers is the loss of income to help cover initial monetary losses. I can't think of any other harm that the coal millers will have if this variance is denied. There is no hardship of land. So that's their harm, that the loss of income. The gains to the public are substantial. And I'm going to list the gains to the public, and those completely outweigh the harm to the coal millers. Number 1, the gain to the public is there's a lower need in the LDR zone, I hope I can use that term, LDR zone, low-density residential, for town services. For instance, there's a lower need for fire, police, and road services. Definitely a public gain. Number 2, there will be less complaining and unhappy neighbors. So If this is denied, there'll be less complaining and unhappy neighbors, especially because we're in a community, and it's the Conleys Grove community. Another gain to the public is people walking on our roads and vehicles on Conleys Grove Road and Water's Edge Road will be safer. If you get rid of all the vehicles and everything, then it's going to be safer. It's sort of not quite as safe as you'd like it now, but it will become, so the gain would be that it becomes safer. And then I won't get into all these in detail, but the gains to the public have to do with swimming, boating, and ice safety is improved. Okay. Couple other things relating to this. The Quo Millers have said that substantial justice is done because the renters will be fully vetted and pay for their lodging ahead of time with quiet hours between 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. I have 3 comments on their response. Their response, number one, their response does not answer the question, the original question. Number 2, in the case of large groups, for example, 10 people, I suspect that generally only one person might be vetted, and the other 9 are not. I also suspect that the single person vetted is the person who provides the credit card. So therefore, there may be many non-vetted occupants next door to us, and we don't look forward to that. And the third thing relating to their response, to date, there have been many violations of quiet hours. The quiet hours are supposed to be between 10 and 8 in the morning. We've had all sorts of violations of that. We get woken up at night, so forth, so on. Okay, concerning the spirit and intent of the zoning ordinance, the Hepworth response is as follows. Granting this variance to the Quo Millers would be contrary to the spirit and intent of the following 3 low-density residential characteristics. I'm talking just about the LDR zone. The LDR, and I'm saying the LDR zone provides a peaceful and quiet living environment. I think that's sort of the purpose of the LDR zone. Have less houses, quiet. The LDR zone is where the homes are separated from each other by a substantial distance. I'm 13 feet away. The LDR zone is where the homes are typically occupied by the owner and his or her family. Okay, that completes all 5 criteria. I would like to now revisit each of the 3 photos that I showed you earlier, but this time I'll provide my photo comments and answer Mr. Tripp's question. Back to the first one. Okay. Why are all those cars there? Somebody asked me that.
Yep.
This photo is okay, again, I just want to point out the Quo Miller home is that big white one in the middle, and to the right of it is their spare lot, and that's where all the cars are, and my home is to the left again, and to the right of the telephone pole over there, that's the Allens. This photo is the scene that existed on December 3rd at 11:30 p.m. at night.
11:30 at night?
A permanently mounted security camera on the Redmond Davis porch at 70 Conleys Grove Road was used to capture this photo. You can see the floor of the porch at 70 Conleys Grove Road, and that big post there is holding up their porch. Okay, concerning the vehicles that you see, there are 10 vehicles in the Quo Miller short-term rental parking area. The reason they're there is there was a big party. There are 4 vehicles in front of the Kelly's home and on her lawn. Kelly is the one that's taking, the photo is the one at 70 Conleys Grove Road. So you can see four cars they're partially on Kelly is one of the owners. They're partially on her lawn and partially on the street. There are 4 vehicles in front of Keeley's home. There's another gal that lives across the street and on her lawn, but they aren't shown in this photo. There are also several vehicles in front of other homes not captured in this photo. So, the answer was there was a party, and the party broke up at 2:30 in the morning. And when the party broke up, the cars that aren't seen in front of another owner's home woke the gal up. She smelled pot. I don't know what pot smells like, but she smelled pot. There was loud talking, 2:30 in the morning. And those people, I assume, had consumed alcohol also inside the house. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself now. Okay.
Well, I can help you that I think we get the point about the vehicles.
Okay. Okay. I want to, though, show you, just by looking at the photo, you can see why 2 of the 5 variance criteria are not met. For instance, number 1, the property value criteria is not met because after seeing this photo, someone considering to purchase my home in the low LDR zone would definitely think twice about making a fair offer to me or about making an offer in the first place. It also doesn't help the property value that there is a short-term rental only 13 feet away, which during the course of a year could have up to 1,560 occupants and up to 468 vehicles. The public interest criteria is not met. It is not in the public interest to have short-term rental visitors doing the following. Number 1, they're breaking the winter parking ban. They're parked on the street. You're not supposed to be parking on the street. Number 2, they're partially parking on neighbors' lawns. These are all the visitors that are in those cars. They leaving early in the morning after a night of alcohol and drugs and having to travel on the dangerous Conley's Grove Road and Waters Edge Road before reaching Route 111 is not in the public interest. Making excessive noise so early in the morning, 2:30 in the morning, they all break up then, so that it wakes up neighbors. That's not in the public interest. And the last one is leaving party debris along the roadways as they leave. The next morning, it was found that all sorts of bottles and things along the way, so we assumed it was them. It was right in front of here, and it was right in front of a couple neighbors. That's not all in the public interest. Again, this photo is courtesy of the Kelly Redmonds and Philip Davis, the owner of 70 Conley's Grove Road. They have sent you a very informative letter expressing their opposition to the variance. Okay, let's look at the next photo.
So if I can just point out something, and I understand the significance of what you're showing, but just to expedite your testimony a little bit, give you some guidance. We understand that the impact that this one evening had, but if you can try to generalize to the 5 criteria as opposed to this one specific event, that might be helpful.
I understand that, yeah. Ms. Quo, when she was here on January 19th, she talked about another party. We didn't catch a photo of that. There was another party the day before New Year's, and so it wasn't just this one thing.
And so in regards to some of the 5 criteria, I think that I don't want to lead you too much here. I'm interested in your testimony, but the potentials of what you're speaking of exist. We understand that, and I think that your point is that without a management check-in here or someone monitoring this who is the owner of this, you have the opportunity for more occurrences such as this or unguarded. Mrs. Miller has indicated that there would be a penalty for such infractions, but the penalty comes in after the fact. It doesn't help prevent the disturbance, and that disturbance in kind can create some of the issues relative to the 5 criteria: diminution of value, peace, tranquility, odor, noxious noise, those kind of things. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, just a quick correction. Sorry to do it to you. Mr. Miller, Mrs. Quo, not Mrs. Miller.
No, thank you very much. All right. You know how I get with names.
Yes. God only knows what the next one will be.
One comment to what you said, though. Because there's no supervision or anyone there, Ms. Quo, I think, stated on January 19th that she relies on neighbors to give her a call if this thing's wrong. And I don't want to be a policeman. I don't want to have to, I mean, I'm the closest that anyone is to their home. I see everything, I hear everything. I don't want to be a policeman.
So in this photo here, I see the boundary stakes. Did you place those there, or were they from the original survey?
They were placed there this past summer because the Quos Millers wanted to put up that fence. That was just put up, and it's right on the boundary line. And first they did a survey, and that's what that red post is.
Enough. Mr. Mackey, what I see in the image here for the Quo's case is that it looks like it's a poured foundation. Was that fairly new, that home, or rebuilt or something? Seems like it's newer construction for the time, and newer could be 20 years, right?
Yeah, no, I'm not exactly sure what year. I mean, the home's been there for quite some time, although I know there was some substantial work that was required, I believe, when the Quo Millers bought it. It'd be kind of let go from previous ownership. There was a new septic that had to go in and so forth. But the home itself has existed for quite a number of years.
Where is the septic on this located? Do we know? Is it in the front?
What was that?
The septic on this?
The septic is under that parking area where the 10 vehicles are from that photo.
Okay. I wonder how that held up. Okay. Let me come back to you, Mr. Hepworth, and let you continue. And I think you get the feel of where the board is, that we understand and comprehend the 5 criteria a bit, and just try to kind of hone in your testimony to a yearly matter versus 1 or 2 evenings.
Okay. Okay, go to the third photo, please. Okay, there's a lot to be said about this photo, and I've showed it to you before. You can see how close we are. I mean, that's one of my intents of showing it before. Now I'm going to give you some comments about that photo. I'm going to use this photo to point out all the significant adverse impacts that the Hepworths experienced by having the Quo Miller short-term rentals so very, very close to their home. Again, only 13 feet from foundation to foundation. The first significant adverse impact is concerning noise infiltration. I mean, that should be obvious. You see how close our decks are? 10 people on their deck, 2 people. There's only 2 people in our home. 10, 2, you hear everything that goes on. Our homes are so close that we can easily hear all renters' noise, even when it is at a normal volume level. And even during the day, and even during the night, and even indoors, and even outdoors. When we're in our home with our doors closed, we can hear certain things, especially if there's a party or people on the deck talking late at night at 2:30 in the morning or something. We hear them, and they wake us up. If you have ever lived on a lake before, you probably already know that outside noise travels very easily on a lake, especially at night. Concerning noise again, the renter's noise almost always interrupts and disturbs our concentration, no matter what we are doing. Foul language noise is definitely the worst noise that we experience, especially when we have our own guests with young children. We've experienced this, not all the time. Some of the renters, very bad. I can't imagine that they were ever vetted.
Okay, Mr. Corby, you have a question?
Yeah, Mr. Hepworth, with all due respect to to what you're bringing up about the noise, so some of the questions I would have with this, and knowing myself personally, I'm a loud talker. So if I own the house, if I were out on the deck or just kind of being loud outside, does that impact when it's just the people within the house as well, or is it just amplified by the sheer amount of people that raises the noise to you?
I'm not sure I equate,
Just trying. So if it was a family of 4 inside of the house,
Yeah.
and they were living there long term, do you think the noise would still be an issue, or would that?
yeah, the noise has always been an issue, but it gets amplified. They only had 4, they have 3 children and a husband and wife. 5 people have lived there for the first 7 months when they bought it. It was not an Airbnb. 7 months, you get to know your neighbors. We know that noise is a problem, being that close. So we adapt. We get to know the neighbors. The neighbors know that we can hear their telephone calls. We can hear everything, and they know that about us, and we adapt to each other. But now we've changed to a short-term rental, and you get people we don't know. We don't get to trust them. We trust the Millers. They're a nice family. We were happy that they were there. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a little bit more of the unpredictability as far as just the noise.
Yeah.
Thank you.
To mitigate the renter's noise, we have often had to create our own white noise. In other words, I try and sleep out there some nights in the evening, and you hear all this noise next door, and it's more than usual because the neighbors before knew I used to sleep out there on our screened-in porch, and but now the new people. So we create our own white noise. We'll turn our radio up, or I have some music that plays white noise, and so that tends to block us.
But, so to Mr. Corbett's point, and what I was trying to give you some guidance to, the Quo Millers could sell the home, they could sell it to someone new, and is that going to change the noise output? You never know who your next neighbor is, and it's not that I'm trying to create a defense for the Airbnb versus home ownership, but what you're speaking of about the white noise, you're using that as justification in opposition to this application for an Airbnb. So it's the noise issue. You could get a new neighbor who lives there all the time. You may end up having to use the white noise to enjoy the tranquility of your porch. And I think that's what the guidance was I was trying to suggest to you earlier, was to try and get to the point. This board understands the 5 criteria. Most of us have been here a few years, and myself and the 2 folks furthest to my right have been here for 10 and 20 years. So we understand the ideas of the 5 criteria, but the white noise in that kind of situation doesn't necessarily answer to those issues when you are in a home that you've probably lived in. How long have you resided
11
here?
years.
11? So that home to your left has been there longer than you've lived in your home, correct? The Quo
Millers have lived in their home 15 months.
But the Quo Miller home has been there longer than you've lived in your home.
Yes.
And so white noise could be an issue at any time.
The white noise thing, no, if it went back, if it was not a short-term rental, we could have some owners that came in and caused all sorts of noise.
But you don't know that.
But if they did, then we would, after a while, we'd get to know them.
I understand. It's that neighborly thing that we've seen to lost, not just in this community, but nationwide. It's a lot different than it was in the 60s and 70s, correct?
Well,
I'm not sure
The neighborly thing is a lot different now than it was 40 and 50 years ago.
Well, in the Conley's Grove community, we are a community, and people worry or care about each other, but if somebody owned this and they wanted to make lots and lots of noise, we can't do anything about it. But typically, we try and work with them. We get to know them, we get to trust them, and then we both experience noise. They experience our noise, we experience their noise.
You may be starting to lose the board. Why don't I suggest to you to go ahead and wrap up your testimony?
Can I ask a couple
may.
questions?
Yep.
Please. The way you've described Conley's Grove, is this a private community?
No.
So anybody can drive on the roads?
Yes.
Then the roads are not private? They're town roads?
Well, one of the roads is, I'm not sure, it's called Escambuet Road, which is right in the Conley's Grove community, and I think it's semi-private, or Mr. Mackey probably knows better than I.
Yeah, Conley's Grove Road is a town road, town-maintained road. Escambuet, which is a little stub that, well, off of Conley's, and then it runs along the back cove of the lake. That's, I guess you could call, that does receive some maintenance from the town, but it's not an accepted town road.
Yeah, all right, well, I'm trying to get in my head, what the environment of Conley's Grove community is, and whether, there's any special restrictions, and apparently there are not any special restrictions.
It's a town road, they're separate lots, everybody owns their separate lot. It's typical of most of the lakeshore development around these parts, tight lots, small lots, tight homes. It's just typical, but, but they call it a community, just like you have other areas on Big Island Pond or Beaver Lake that they consider themselves a community because it's a fairly dense neighborhood.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. Can I ask a couple more? Now, are they on town sewer?
No, out there it's all private septic and private wells.
Thank you.
We've had a lot of applications for improvements in this area. A lot of outdated homes, structures that have been trying to change over to not just seasonal, but more permanent residents. And so we've seen a lot of applications over the last few years for properties that have been in this neighborhood to kind of revitalize the neighborhood, so to speak.
Yeah, well, the other thing that kind of bothers me is if you look at the minimum lot area for LDR, that's like 3 acres. I don't believe these are 3-acre lots.
No.
Mr. Ver, you wish to address that at all? The current zoning in this area?
Oh, yeah, that's all cabins from the old time.
No? No. Okay. You are correct in that this area, the zoning really kind of started out on Island Pond Road, but this area gets swept into that, and the Island Pond Road is a lot of older, larger lots, and this, for some reason, didn't get segregated from that area.
Well, the reason I mention that is it's hard to apply some of the other uses for LDR when clearly this is not LDR.
Right, yeah, no, you are correct. So. All right, are you all set, Mr. Tripp, with your questions for now?
fine.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Hepworth, why don't you go ahead and try and,
I'll try and speed it up.
yes.
I don't want to
please.
put everyone to sleep, but these are all very, very important things to me, personally.
Well, and I understand that, and I don't want to sidetrack you from your testimony, but I want you to understand that you're speaking with people that are well-versed and we understand, but you're also speaking about matters that are not necessarily, the 5 criteria, some of them, the way you're addressing them aren't specific to just the Quo Miller situation, so.
Right, I'm focusing on, have you ever heard that term, significant adverse impact? That I'm really focusing on that and hope the variance can be denied just on that alone, because
Yes, so you tried to caption the white noise issue that you put on, correct? And I tried to get you, or try to lead you to understand that you having to use white noise to enjoy the peace and tranquility of your property isn't necessarily going to be isolated to be an issue that's isolated to the Quo Miller ownership or what they do with the property. If you had new neighbors that moved in with 2 13-year-olds in the house, you could still be in that point where you feel like you have to have white noise to have peace and quiet. And so I understand that, but that doesn't mean that it's absolute just to this application, and so that's where I'm trying to get you to, is just the 5 criteria specific to this. And we understand that part of the issue is that because it's a short-term rental, that you lose control of that versus having that neighborly contact with somebody who's there all the time. But go ahead.
Okay. The next thing is concerning privacy issues. As you can see from the diagram, everyone can see who is on each other's deck and what they are doing. Everyone can see who is in each other's screened-in porch and what they are doing. Everyone can look inside each other's home through the side windows and see what each other is doing. You'll see up there's 2 side windows. We can look in their window and see them sitting at their table inside. They can look in our window and see what our TV and what we're watching and everything like that. Okay, concerning security issues, we worry about the possible misuse of information that the renters could gather by our normal talking, and that we could be subject to identity theft. They could get to know our social security number and credit card number very easy, because normal talking, sometimes we talk on the phone out on our screened-in porch, so we typically try to avoid that now. Concerning safety issues, this is a big one for us. We truly worry about our home catching on fire due to careless actions of the renters. For example, people go out and smoke on the Quo Miller's deck. They throw their cigarette butts off the deck, easily reaches, we have mulch all along the side of our house, and based on the 6 Shenito Road issue, we worry about it. And then the other thing is, it hasn't happened yet, but I'm sure it's going to happen this next 4th of July, aiming fireworks in our direction. The embers from the fire, we've had this happen before with other owners. They're careless with their fireworks. The embers have landed on our pontoon boat, which is right in front of, not shown in the diagram, but right in front of our house, caused a minor singe to our rug. Anyway, concerning odor infiltration issues, we always know when the renters are smoking. We can always smell the food that the renters are eating. Concerning light infiltration issues, keeping the outside lights on after dark and after quiet hours is a problem that destroys the serenity of a summer's evening. For example, the 2 floodlights on the Quo Miller's 3rd deck, way up, you can't see the lights, but you can see their windows on the 3rd level. They light up the whole front of our house, like a Christmas tree. Often these lights are left on all night and even days at a time.
But so in regards to the lights, that could happen whether there's permanent ownership there or a renter. And that's the point I'm trying to say to you is if you could hone your testimony in to the 5 criteria that are specific regarding renters, not whether or not you have communication with them. You may have food smells from the neighbor, doesn't matter who lives there, just because of the setup, correct?
Yes.
And so that's what we want to hear is just specific to the 5 criteria specific to a renter being there.
But I'm focusing on significant adverse impact, which has to do with substantial justice.
But it has
So I
nothing
have
to do with whether a renter is there or a permanent homeowner.
Okay.
That's the part that you're missing here. Somebody's going to cook food in that house all the time.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir, Mr. Burgess.
I'm going to make this to the gentleman. I have my lights on all night for security reasons, and I think other people do the same thing. So that, no matter what you do, if people live in that place, leave their lights on all night, they have the right to.
Yeah.
So it's not something, that you can complain about really a lot, unless, you want to bring them to court maybe. But besides that, it's the right of most people to try to protect their property.
Thank you,
And that's
Mr.
the way they
Burgess.
do it.
I understand. Their lights are misadjusted, and I haven't had the opportunity to tell them their lights are, that the lights were put up this past summer, and they're misadjusted.
Sure.
That's something that if the owners were there, I'd tell them about it.
Well,
If I-
you have that right to write the letter, but and I'm not trying to take you away from your right to have a complaint about the Airbnb. That's not what I'm doing. What I'm trying to do is help you to expedite your testimony.
Okay.
And understand the relevance that lights on all night, food smells coming from there, the proximity of your home is what it is to this structure, and so you're kind of losing that argument in those regards. You have to think about it and say, well, what if somebody was permanently living there? Would I have the same issue? And the answer is yes. So it doesn't go to the 5 criteria, but some points you've made do. Okay?
Okay. Concerning the number of bedrooms, they have, inside the SDR, they have 3 bedrooms now, and they say that they can sleep 10 people. We assume that the number of bedrooms, though, might increase by 2 when the Quo-Miller's planned second story to the converted garage is added. This would result in a total of 5 bedrooms. And I assume at that time they could increase the number of occupants from 10 to 12 to 13 or 14.
So are you telling us that there are bedrooms above the garage?
There's a converted garage that does not have the second. That's where they're planning to put up another floor, and that's what we understand. So if you grant their variance, I mean, they're allowed up to 10, but that's going to go up. They're going to be able to allow more than 10.
Mr. Mackey, care to give us some input on that
I
permitting
would
issue?
say, just as an FYI, the septic that was put in there was it was rated as a 5-bedroom septic system.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, before completing my presentation, I would like to briefly discuss the following 2 topics: the January 19th meeting discussions and the topic of quasi-hotels in the LDR zone. And I'll be brief on this. In fact, I'll skip what took place on the 19th, go directly to my quasi-hotel thing. I agree with the town of Derry that a variance is required. I base that statement on the following. I consider a short-term rental to be a quasi-hotel, and as such, the short-term rental should be treated like a hotel. Hotels and motels are allowed in 9 of the 21 Derry zones. The low-density residential zone is not one of those 9 zones. For example, a short-term rental is not allowed in the LDR zone. Without the zoning ordinance actually saying the words short-term rental or quasi-hotel, it seems clear to me that the spirit and intent of our zoning ordinance is to treat hotels and quasi-hotels the same. To date, I am aware of only 2 short-term rentals in the LDR zone. If this variance were to fail, then only 2 of the 16 short-term rentals would be affected, not each of the 821 short-term rentals. That concludes my presentation.
I just want to correct again for the record, Mr. Chair, the 821 was the general Derry area, not just Derry.
Very good. Okay, thank you, Mr. Corbett, for that clarification. Mr. Tripp, are you all set? And anybody between Mr. Tripp and I on the left? Mr. Donlin? All right, all set. Ms. Moran, you okay?
I'm all set,
All right,
thank you.
very good. Come down my right. You folks all set?
Let's ask my
Very
questions.
good. Thank you, Mr. Hepworth.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman? Can we take a break? 5 minutes? I know. I gotta go. Can I tell you? I'm an old man, got a bad prostate.
All right, let's take 3 minutes, please. Mr. Burgess is on this case, so I will, we'll go for a 3-minute break.
A minute.
Do you have anybody out there remotely, Mr. Preventure?
One moment, Mr. Chair, we'll check.
I will.
At this time, we see none rise.
Very good. Let's go to the next abutter, if there's someone there who would like.
Oh, good evening. Can you hear me? Oh, I guess you can. Okay. Yes, my name is Jane Allen, and this is my husband Douglas Allen, and we live at 65 Conleys Grove Road.
Would be to the right of the quote.
We are to the right. If you want to display that first picture that maybe Ken had, you'd be able to see the house better and maybe our view of what we see from next door. So we are here tonight to speak against the variance. And I just want to show you that
Right there, yep.
right there, we are to the right there, and you see their house. So we do have a little bit more land than what Ken has. We have that extra lot. But what we do have is we have direct view to the front door and also the master bath, and those are key areas that I want to address tonight. So I just want to start off by saying that since 2022, there have been approximately 17 parties occupying that residence as short-term rentals, along with some pets. Of those 7, only 12 or less only 7 of them had less than 12 occupants at one time. So this has been over-occupied at least 65% of the time. And I know we heard about the different things that was going on as far as vetting and stuff like that. And what do you do when it's over-occupied? I have contacted Elizabeth on multiple occasions. I'm actually her person that she was referring to that called on New Year's Eve about these cars. And nothing was done.
Ms. Quo, you mean?
Yes.
Mrs. Allen, I'm sorry, can you go back and just repeat those numbers that you said at the beginning?
Sure. There were 17 different parties occupying the residency, and this is since August of 2022. Only 7 had less than 12 occupants. Now, I understand that they have, now it's listed at 10, so actually, if I recalculate it, there's probably a higher percentage there of being over-occupied. And generally, the rule of thumb, whatever you want to use for this, is 3 bedrooms, be 2 person per bedroom. So if you were using that, it'd be significantly more. Some of the problems we have here is that they're draining our resources. The home is equipped with a 5 to 6 person hot tub in the master bath, which is a fill and empty every single time. We can see the people walking by up there, so we know there's activity going on all the time. It's our estimation that they're filling and emptying that tub about 10 to 15 times a weekend when there's a high number of people. So at one time, there was 25 people. Some had 12 or whatever, they're filling and emptying that continuously. It's taken about 400 or 500 gallons approximately to fill that tub. So approximately 5,000 to 7,000 gallons is being taken from the wells. We have noticed a significant reduction in our particular well recovery and also the quality of our water. I called a couple of well companies over the past couple of weeks, and it would cost us approximately $600 to have our well evaluated to see what kind of impact it actually has. If the outcome of that would probably be that the pump needed to be lowered into the well. We'd also experience excessive expenses as far as getting a stronger pump with the new tubing and the wiring as a result of this overuse of water. And as you mentioned, you're looking at these cars here in that lot, and we also found out that that is where the septic is, because we knew that, we saw it built. So you figure what is happening when you have all the 12 cars, which is common. Between 10 and 12 cars are commonly there every single weekend. And now you're pushing in 5,000 to 7,000 gallons of water underneath that. So we have concerns with what could potentially happen there. We also look at the safety of this. That house has put in a new well a couple years ago, and it has a lot of impurities in it. So as a result of it, they have this water purifier in there. But I'm concerned as to if they're pumping all this water through that and they're not maintaining that, what kind of issues would those renters have? And what kind of liability is there? I know for a fact there's arsenic in that water, and if they haven't been properly maintaining that particular purifier, I'm sure there'd be other issues as well. We also worry about the fire and the smoke detectors. Is that being looked at? Is there batteries in it? Is it all, with that kind of usage, we're concerned about those type of things. Also, that septic. We talked about the septic, the leach field, as we mentioned, is below those cars, but there's also a tank out there that's being heavily used that has not been looked at or even inspected in the past year since they've been doing this. They talk about quality of renters. The short-term renters living there is like a hotel without a management, as we mentioned. And what I'm concerned about is that this is basically a free-for-all. So some examples, and these are not hypothetical things, these are things we've actually witnessed from being so close and having that perspective from where our front door is, or our slider is. The tenants renting are generally highly intoxicated, noisy, and disrespectful to neighbors. They park their cars blocking roadways, as you can see, driveways and walkways. They leave behind the trash, and he mentioned the liquor bottles. They cause damage to our vehicle. If you can see right there, there's a vehicle next to, on the right-hand side of that telephone pole. That is our truck. We've sustained damage to that truck. Somebody keyed that truck, the whole entire side of the Quos in Miller's. That's going to cost us over $1,000 to fix. They don't also abide by the New Hampshire laws, so they do smoke the recreational marijuana near our doors and windows, subjecting our families and friends to the drugs. The tenants brought unleashed dogs that have attacked my small dogs on 4 occasions. I made numerous demands to abide by the leash laws before they would secure their dog. They walk their dogs in the neighborhood, leaving feces on the lawns and the streets, and they don't clean up after them. There is another tenant, male, who continues to expose himself and through the bathroom window in the morning while I was getting ready for work. He did it every single morning that he was there. So yeah, obviously it's light. I can see him, he can see me. He knew I was there. Some of the safety issues we have, the vehicle speeding through the neighborhood, nearly missing the cars, the kids. I'm a runner. I've got almost hit multiple times. I'm very careful going around those bends because these people, it's 20 miles an hour. They're not doing 20 miles an hour. And they have total disregard of the neighbors by leaving trash and debris all over the streets, trespassing on a body's properties. I've observed them walking onto our neighbors' docks, going onto their boats that don't belong to the Woes and Miller, the Quo and Miller. They're unaware of the Big Island Pond and New Hampshire laws. For example, fishing, they're supposed to have licenses. I watched them remove fish without a license. I see them blocking the road, the boat passageway between the island and the mainland. They leave kayaks and paddle boats unsecured. Right now, there is one right now unsecured in front of their house. As soon as this water comes up, that boat's going to be floating away and hitting everything in its path. The next thing is the general welfare of the community. We observe that the short-term renters attracted this family have a gross, this home, have a gross disrespect for the pond community. We have corrected renters on activities, for example, feeding ducks, which is illegal. One gentleman on New Year's Eve was actually driving golf balls across the pond, aiming to hit the houses on Escambua Island. And we had to go out there and say, what are you doing? Stop that. We also observed trespassing on abutters' docks and boats and securing severely intoxicated people needing to be saved from near drowning after falling out of the kayaks that the Miller and Quos provide. They have life jackets. They don't use it. We have to go rescue them. And these are all things that we're observing because we're so close. We certainly can't turn our back on someone drowning. We also observe that they don't provide timely snow removal of the driveways and walks. And I think right now the walk is not even snowed out, shoveled after the last storm we just had. We also witnessed multiple guests slipping and almost falling on those roadways, the walkways and the driveways. As far as the property value goes, I think indeed it will diminish the property value of the home. Today's buyers are more savvy, and like Ken was mentioning, they're most likely to find out that this house is a short-term rental and would certainly impact any kind of potential buyers that we may have. We also receive a letter, if we may read it, my husband will read it, from Fred and Karen Wilkins. They have a deeded right down 67 Conleys Grove Road, which is the extra piece of land between our house and their house, and their deeded right is for them to access it to go down to their boat dock. Now, for the past 40 years, there's not been a fence there. That fence was only installed recently. So they did put in gates, but as you could see, the gate from where that driveway is, how can they get through there with all their supplies, with all those cars there? Because that is not unusual. That is an occurrence that happens all the time. So if I may, my husband will read that letter from them.
Can you speak in the microphone?
No, which, no.
I don't see the Wilkinses as in the butter on this.
You don't see them as an abutter? Okay, all right.
Bypass on it.
Okay, that's fine.
They are, in fact, abutters because they have right-of-way access up and down on the Miller Quo's property. And what's happened is they've put in gates for them. These people are in their 80s. They don't walk very well, okay? In the past 40 years, they've been up and down this property and haven't had any obstacles.
We don't have them as an abutter on the list, which means that they did not, I'm sorry, Mr. Preventer. And we would prefer to have the letters from other abutters given directly to the board and not read into the record by another abutter.
I can give you a copy of this letter that they have, if you'd like.
We'll accept that letter.
Okay.
We'll take that into consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mackey. Mr. Corbett, would you just review that for me and see if we can highlight the points there for a later consideration? Anything else, folks?
Just a couple of things. We obviously were not aware that they had the intention of renting their short term. But there are a couple of things that we talked to them about which they refused to do. Like, for example, they could have moved the fence over 10 feet off the property line to allow the Wilkins to be able to access their dock more readily. I did explain to them about the well, so I would have assumed that they would have taken more responsibility as far as this excess water. They did talk about the lights. The thing I do want to tell them is that I did talk to them a lot about the lighting situation. I know you were saying about the security, but it is very offensive, and they were nice enough to put in these automatic low-lit lights, which were great. I think that's what they should use on the rest of the house. We're also concerned about maintaining the property. It seems though, because they are not here most of the time, the property isn't being properly maintained as far as landscaping. We would like to see like a local manager who takes responsibility for the occupancy. The manager that they have is actually out of Cambridge. So when we call the manager, because we do have that information, that contact information, what her response is, well, I'm in Cambridge, I can't help you with that, but you're supposed to be managing this property. So it seems to me if they had somebody local that could come, at least do a drive-by, see all those cars, see the over-occupancy. I mean, I know they have something in there about a penalty, but who's reporting that besides me telling her?
And usually it's after the fact, correct?
And it is. Well, I call it during, because the New Year's Eve situation where it was building, the cars were building, and she mentioned that somebody called her, and that was myself. She said 2 cars, no, there were 10 cars in the lot at the time I called her to make her aware that you've already had 15 people in that house.
Sure, but by after the fact, it means that the occupants are already in the building.
Yes.
And that someone didn't vet them ahead of time or
Correct.
prevent the matter from happening ahead of time, correct?
Correct. That is absolutely correct.
But you get the situation where, oh, we're having a party, come on over, and then there comes additional people.
Sure.
Yeah.
And this turns into a huge
Yeah, I certainly can see
situation.
that occurrence.
It becomes uncontrollable, too, especially if they're all drunk.
Okay.
Yeah. So with all this, I mean, we're asking that their variance be denied for all these reasons. So this is just what's been happening since August. If it were to be allowed, how much more would we see? How many more things do we have to deal with as we're going into our retirement years? So that's all we have. Any questions?
Yeah, just to sort out some of the contents of what you've given to the board, you know, certain things like smoke detectors and honestly the upkeep of the water system and the diminishment of, that could occur to the septic system by overuse, you certainly make a good point, are not things that are in the purview of this board, but the consideration of them altogether certainly gives some credence to your concerns about perhaps diminution of value or even public interest. So just want to sort those out for you.
Okay.
All right. Anybody have any questions down the line? No?
I have a question for Mr. Mackey.
Okay.
Deeded right-of-ways, are those, is there, they put an obstruction in the deed of right-of-way, don't they have to remove it?
Well, if there's a deeded right-of-way, then yeah, typically it would be recorded in the deed for both properties. It obviously wouldn't be picked up like on our GIS system as an abutter, hence the fact that the Wilkins wouldn't have gotten a butter notice, because technically they don't own that land, but they have a deeded right, I guess.
They own the land, but they have the right to use it as a...
Well, they don't own the land. Well,
No, the people who are using it don't own the land.
but they have a right to use it.
They have a right to use it, all right. Because we have a path down the side of my property similar to it. So is there something they can do about that besides going to court?
Do something from what perspective?
If they've got an
Well,
obstruction.
the fact that it was blocked, or if they felt it was blocked, then I suppose they could take some legal action to
Okay.
force access.
Anybody down on the left? Hang on just a second, folks. Anybody? You all set, Mr. Tripp? Go ahead.
No. Is this a common well or a that is providing water to the Conley's Grove community?
No, we
Everybody
have
has their own
individual.
well.
Yeah, we
You
all
have
have our own
individual?
well, but our well is about probably 50 feet away from theirs. They put theirs in just 2 years ago.
All right. Would you say that the buildings or the properties out there, they're about, say, what do you figure the separation between the buildings are?
It depends. Like we have that big separation because there was an extra piece of land there between
So
us.
how
and
far to the building to your,
The other side?
yes,
That is about 12 feet?
12 feet?
13 feet, yeah, on the other side.
so when the people are renting the property, you said that typically there's a large number of cars, some of which are blocking the road?
Yeah, well, the picture you saw is somewhere blocking the road.
Yeah.
The ones that we commonly see, they do 4 across and 3 in a row. So there's 12 cars there. That's
Which
what we
is-
commonly see
Which is on the,
in their property, on their parking lot.
short-term rental property.
Yeah.
So a large proportion of the time, the renters are not blocking the road.
Correct.
Depends how big the party is.
Yeah, but generally
Well,
speaking,
I didn't say all the time, I said a large
Yeah.
proportion.
yes.
Right.
Generally speaking, there aren't a lot blocking the road, but I don't have a really clear view of that because you could see our driveway, our garage is there, so we don't have a clear view of the front.
Okay.
Even that night, they had all those cars, I couldn't see it. I could see everybody in the driveway. So I could see there were 10, 12 cars in the driveway, but I couldn't see beyond that from my door.
What would you say the width of the road is?
Okay.
Is it
Maybe about
as wide as
1.5, two cars can
car
pass. Yeah.
two cars can pass?
Yeah,
but
width.
it's not a typical town road, or is it?
I'd say it is. 2 cars can generally, it's not lined or anything, but 2 cars, you have to go slow so you don't hit anybody, but yeah, 2
Yeah.
cars you can get by.
Have you ever seen a fire truck out there?
Yes,
So the fire department has no problem getting out there?
correct.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Dietzel, you all set?
All set.
Mr. Donlin and Mr. Bimba? Yeah, okay. Mr. Corbett, just before I excuse you folks, Mr. Corbett will just briefly caption that letter that you gave.
Yeah. So, Mr. Chair, and to the Ellen, thank you for providing. I'm just going to kind of read what I what I've taken from this, and I think is relevant in relation to the property and what they have. So the Wilkins were the prior owners of 67 Conley's Grove Road and 70 Conley's Grove Road. They have an easement across 67, which is recorded in the deed that came over from Mr. Miller and Mrs. Quo. Kind of puts in what they have there, but especially that they have rights to a right-of-way along with the rights to construct and maintain a 20-foot dock at the end of this right-of-way, which would be right at where the water is coming. The property where the owners currently reside, which is my assumption of why it didn't come out, if you were to look at 70, which is the picture that we saw from looking across the street at where those cars were, where the Redmond and Ms. Redmond and Mr. Davis are, picture a street back behind that and then 3 houses over to the right, try to visualize how far away. So they are a bit away from where the property would be, but it does appear the complaint is that their right-of-way is blocked mainly by chairs or typically things that are being left behind out in the yard that do block, kind of block their entrance to down to the dock. And I believe they've got some seems implied concerns about what would happen with their dock if they were to build one.
Very good. Okay, thank you. Folks, you have any last points?
I'm all set.
Okay, both of you?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yep, all right, very good. Before we go to the next person, Mrs. Moran has a letter from another abutter. You could identify that abutter, Ms. Moran, and caption those points for us.
Thank you. It is from Kelly Redmond and Philip Davis of 70 Conley's Grove Road. They have expressed concerns of public safety due to over-congestion of the road leading in and out of their neighborhood. An accident has occurred in the same area, and an approval of this application could increase traffic volumes, and there are concerns for the well-being of children and residents in general. Reflections of the most recent events disrupting the neighborhood late in the evening, to be Pacific 1 to 2:30 a.m. with loud parties and illegal impacts. Concerns for overall disruptions of the neighborhood, diminishing qualities of life and value through loss of tranquility and therefore diminishing property values. Further reflection is the conflict with monetary means which should not be imparted on the abutters. As a statement relevant to the awareness of the business community, these parcels are not there to create economic development of the town, and Big Island Pond is already a very sought-after destination recreationally. Ms. Redmond concludes by stating that concern is for changing the residential character of the neighborhood.
Very good, thank you.
And Ms. Redmond and Mr. Davis wish no ill will to the Quo Miller applicants as well.
Very good. That letter in its entirety it's a consolidated letter. That letter in its entirety will be placed in the building file for the record, for review for anyone that wishes to see it. That being said, Mr. Provencher, do you have anybody else remotely out there?
At this time, seeing none rise.
Very good. So let me make a call to anyone else who's in the room here.
Sorry, before we go back to the public, I just want to correct, I left out not just beach chairs blocking the gates, but also vehicles.
Very good, thank you. Anybody else wish to come up and speak in opposition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Michael Buckley. I live at 83 Conley's Grove Road, so it's down maybe 4 or 5 doors from the property in question. I would like, you've covered a lot of ground tonight. I promise not to repeat it. I do appreciate, I believe there's minutes in the back of the room from the January committee meeting.
Yes.
I would like to point your attention to the second page, 12. There's the first one and the second one are both labeled 12. Fourth paragraph from the bottom, it was the testimony of the applicant that the spirit of the ordinance is observed.
No.
And then the spirit of the ordinance is referred to in criteria number 5. And the little bit of text under criteria number 5 says, the zoning ordinance was established to promote, that, and then in quotes, health, safety, and general welfare of the community. I think you saw it tonight in the second photograph that Mr. Hepworth showed. It showed a nice view of the lake. They're all beautiful homes there. They're right on the lake, and the fence has gates in it. And what it also showed that wasn't referred to is there's a dock associated with the applicant's property. I think it is very unrealistic to think that the folks that rent that house, whether it's short or long-term, are going to stay within the boundaries of the fence. Think of some hot July day, and you're staring at a lake, you've got a dock right there. I'm not sure putting neophytes on the lake in a rental capacity promotes the health, safety of the community.
Okay.
So I'll stop there with that one. Back again in the minutes, second page 12. The second paragraph from the bottom states that surrounding property values are not diminished because it enhances the ability of local businesses to build awareness of Big Island Pond. That's just egregious. That's just, how could that possibly be true, that it will not affect property values because it helps another business somewhere down Route 111? So I think that's just inaccurate.
Okay.
Thirdly, I would say that the board has been very generous to the applicant. The applicant received a letter, I understand, from Mr. Mackey saying that short-term rentals were not allowed. That was over 2 months ago, yet short-term rentals have been allowed since the applicant was informed that they were not allowed. So I believe the board has been more than generous with the applicant, and the variance should be denied this evening.
Very good. Anybody have any questions for Mr. Buckley?
No.
The last point I would add goes to the question of abutters.
Okay.
It's plain the homes on both sides of the applicant are abutters. I don't know if you think of Big Island Pond is controlled by a dam. When the dam is opened in the fall, the water level drops 7 or 8 feet. That means there's property, exposed land, in front of everybody's home. And it varies depending on what the water depth is in front of your home. There's probably 10 feet in front of my house. Who owns that land, and are they in a abutter?
Well, if you're asking the question in regards to the abutters list that we have, does the receding water line open it up to other property boundaries? I would say probably not. I suppose we could get an attorney in here that could argue the matter in multiple ways, but for the simplicity, we follow a certain policy that's consistent, which is the direct abutters that run along the property lines, both directly to the left and to the right, but also directly across the road. So,
I understand that, but I believe the case could be made that all of the land that gets exposed for 6 months out of the year, when it's low tide, if you will, is owned by the Island Pond Corporation. And if so, the Island Pond Corporation should be notified. And if the corporation was notified, I think you would have a room full tonight, because I'm supposing that the president of the corporation would then notify the shareholders. The shareholders are the property owners on the lake, of which I am. So I don't know what the answer is, but I think it opens a question if the land in front of the homes, when the water has been released, are they abutters?
Sure.
And that further begs the question, because right now, you can have disturbances on that land. You have four-wheelers, you have dirt bikes, and the residents call the Big Island Pond Corp.
I suspect they could. I suspect that perhaps, maybe I'm out on a limb, DES might have an issue in there, but also Fish and Game, but I'm only speculating. What I will tell you is that we're consistent with our policies, and those policies, I think, probably marry along with the consistency of other communities. Like I said, I'm sure there's an attorney out there that might be willing to argue that point, and I won't defend or support that, but again, we're consistent with the policies on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
If there's
We can also note one other thing, that we did review the bylaws, so we did take a lot of things into consideration.
The bylaws of
The Big Island Pond.
corporation?
Yep.
Okay,
All set?
thank you.
Yeah. Anybody have any questions for Mr. Buckley? All right, thank you very much, sir. Anybody else wish to come up? Seeing no gestures, or anybody rise?
Seeing none, rise online, Mr. Chairman.
We will consider ourselves meeting statute, and Mr. Miller, you're welcome to come back up.
Thank you all again for the opportunity to be here tonight. I know it's getting late. I'd like to start by reiterating what was said in the Redmond's letter regarding no ill will. And, when we bought this property with our children, the idea was and continues to be able to use it as much as we can. And we have very much enjoyed the time that we spend there as much as we can, and the interactions that we have had with our neighbors. And again, regardless of the outcome tonight, I would like to reiterate the same sentiments put forward by the Redmonds regarding no ill will. There's been a tremendous amount that was said over the course of this evening regarding issues that the short-term rental has raised with our neighbors and abutters. And while I would like to go through a number of the specific points that were raised, I fear that doing so would take us past the hour. That said, what I would like to do is highlight a couple of key points that I think addresses a number of the issues that were raised, and then maybe do a couple of point-by points and address any questions that come from the board. I think one of the most fundamental questions that gets to the heart of a lot of these issues, which has been raised a number of times tonight, including by the chair of the board, is the question of whether or not the short-term rental itself creates the hardship. The issues that were raised by the members or by the abutters all relate to issues that are not specific to the short-term renters, but rather the nature of the property and anybody who would live there. The fact that noises create a problem, the fact that smells create a problem, all of these issues could be and have been in the past highly relevant, not in the context of rentals, but entirely in the context of who lives there. So for example, 2 owners prior was somebody who frequently had police come to their house. This was somebody who was under arrest, who left the country and has never been found. This is somebody who had multiple teenage children who we were told by our neighbors during one of our conversations used to constantly use foul language, used to constantly have parties. When we had to redo the ceilings in our basement downstairs, we found sexual paraphernalia that was there related to the use of that property by the people who owned that property before. And the fact that there are renters that come that have behaviors that upset our neighbors, I understand that. But those are exactly the same behaviors that maybe if somebody lived there full time, and that in and of itself has nothing to do with renting. The lake is a loud place in general. We could be louder. We could be having a conversation where my wife and I and our 3 kids, our 7-year-old, our 5-year-old, and our 4-year-old, who are constantly screaming, that could be a major problem, and that wouldn't relate to short-term rentals. To put this into an extreme perspective, because ultimately we're talking about a framework of how to make a decision regarding the variance, imagine a scenario where my family were absolutely crazy, and every weekend we had a party of 25 people, and everybody smoked marijuana, and everybody smoked cigarettes, and everybody got drunk, and we were noisy, and we created huge problems, okay? Suppose that were the scenario. and we did that every single night of the week. Now imagine we decided, you know what, we don't want to do that, we want to rent our property. And we start short-term renting the property to people who did not have parties every night, and who did not smoke marijuana, and who did not have all of these problems. All of a sudden, the short-term rental now actually is of benefit to the abutters, because the people who were living there before were actually worse than the renters. The point that I'm trying to make, which has come up over and over again, is again that the issues that are being raised are related to the nature of the property, and it doesn't matter if it's the person who's living there or the short-term rental. That's not what's creating the hardship, as what has been pointed out in some of the discussion earlier. And so I think that's a very important point. Another issue that I'd like to point out is that much of what was stated tonight, I believe, are conjecture. For example, the idea that because somebody said, I wouldn't want to buy your property, that means property prices are, the property value has gone down. There hasn't been any proof or documentation by the abutters that in fact the property values have gone down. I would like to believe that changes in property values over the course of this community and specific houses are probably far more related to the economic slowdown that's been going on and the higher interest rates. And to be able to say that because you have short-term rentals, my property value has gone down on Zillow or Redfin, I think would be a bridge too far. But that itself has not been proof. And in contrast, I believe that the property values actually have gone up based off of the purchase price of the property. As many people here know, assessment values are in part based off of the value of the surrounding properties in their most recent purchase. And the purchase price that we made, if anything, would increase the value of the surrounding properties. There's been this question about, well, this will lead to more police coming. That hasn't happened. There's been this question of that there's been increased risk to the community. Again, that's conjecture. And the important part about all of these things that I think is worth thinking about, especially when you're talking about the neighborly issue, which I completely understand. We are newcomers to this community. We have not been here for 10, 15, 25 years. We are younger than many members of the community. There have been generational changes. There have been changes over time in terms of how we think about the community. I get that. But when you start to say things like Airbnbs are going to degrade the fabric of the community, it's going to lead to more crime, it's going to lead to more people getting hit by cars, all of these sorts of things. Aside from the fact that those are conjectures and that cannot be proven in the case of what we're describing today, nor have these things happened, I would remind everybody that there are already Airbnbs throughout Derry. There are already Airbnbs on the pond, and these things are not happening. So if you want proof as to whether Airbnbs increase the incidence of police having to come because of problems, or because of fire department having to come because people setting things on fire, let's look to where we are today, and we are where we are today, despite the fact that there are already multiple Airbnbs on the property. I want to reiterate the point brought up by Mr. Tripp regarding the fact that these are not private roads, and a lot of the points that were raised are, I don't think, relevant specifically to this case, given the fact that this is public property, public access, regardless who live there, et cetera, that the access to all of this is not related to short-term rentals, as said. I'd also point out the fact, getting to my sort of hypothetical early on of what if we were a terrible family, then having a short-term rental would actually be a benefit to the people around us, and maybe they would love to get us a variance to keep us away for as much as possible, is that, as pointed out in the second testimony, there's been a total of actually 19 times that the property has been rented since August. I went back and I checked this. In December, the property was rented for 10 days. In January, the property was rented for 10 days. In February, the property was rented for 4 days. In March, the property hasn't been rented, okay? Because of a variety of work, school, and familial constraints, our family hasn't been able to spend that much time in our house, nearly as much as we'd like to. So what does that translate to? That translates to 10 nights a month in January where there were people on the property, and 20 nights a month when there were not. 4 nights a month in February when there were people on the property, 24 nights where there are not. 0 nights in March where there were people on the property, 16 nights in March where there were not. And so to be able to say this one incident on January 3rd had such a negative consequence for me, I understand and I appreciate the fact that that particular incident, which we did go back and review, which I can discuss if this is of interest to the board, I accept the fact that that instance was problematic. I bring up again that that can happen at any point by anybody who owns the property. There are parties that occur all of the time across all of Derry and specifically with Big Island Pond. And we aren't there for the majority of the time. The house sits empty, and if anything, that is the ideal situation in terms of a butter. So I just want to point out, for every instance you say this was a bad thing, we can also point to 20 nights a month where there was absolutely no noise, there was absolutely no smoke, there was absolutely no smell because we weren't there. So, I think one of the key issue, the last point I want to make is that, there are a couple of things that were brought up in the course of the testimony that were, as this came out in questioning, that are not actually related to the case. The fact that we have lights on has nothing to do with the renters. It could be related to security. The fence issue, whether or not that creates a problem of easement for Dr. Wilkins and his wife has absolutely no relevance to whether or not a variance should be placed for short-term rentals. So I'm not sure why the fence conversation comes up, aside from the question as to whether or not there was some obstacle placed in front of the fence. But the fence itself, the fact that they asked us to move the fence back, first of all, when we bought the property, we were told them we were going to put up a fence. We have 3 small children. It is not safe for them to be near a body of water without a fence. We got a surveyor that we spent considerable money on specifically to outline the borders. We put the fence up. We spoke to Dr. Wilkins about putting up a gate. All of that is something that's adjudicated in the past. And as pointed out here, I could be worried about any member of the community as to whether or not they change the batteries in their smoke detector, about the amount of water that they use in their bathtub, but that's not relevant to this, the specific case. So, a couple points that I just wanted to highlight again, as I think, a lot of this comes down to a question of specific instances causing specific problems that I revert back to this idea that could happen for any sort of owner. And, these are issues that are ongoing all the time on the lake in terms of noise, in terms of smoking, in terms of people setting off fireworks. These are things that are intrinsic as part of the community as well. I really want to reiterate this question about a decrement in property value, because at the end of the day, I think that is a hardship question that has to be asked specifically as it relates to the short-term rental. So the question is, does the short-term rental decrease the property value? I would start by again saying that I think that this idea that the property value has gone down because of short-term rentals is completely conjecture. There's no proof of that's the case. There's no documentation. There's been no assessment of the property that has documented that the presence of short-term rentals has decreased the property value. The second is that, again, there are other Airbnbs already in the community, and there's no evidence to suggest that the property values of the community have gone down because of those Airbnbs. The third thing I'd like to point out is they had terrible neighbors before, somebody who, again, had the police called on them, et cetera, and whether or not moving to having us as neighbors is an improvement on that and the property value, hard to say for sure. I would also say that we still live there, and I understand the idea of neighborliness, and we've had a very positive interactions with our neighbors, with the Hepworths, which we very much enjoy, and but I do acknowledge the neighborly issue, but I don't think that that concept in and of itself can be used as proof that there's decrease in property value. I would reiterate the point that any decrement in value that they prove over that the property has undergone over the last year cannot be deconvoluted from changes in interest rates and general economic hardships that have gone on throughout the country. In general, there's been a decrease in the demand of buyers throughout property markets in the United States. I don't know if my wife at the last appointment brought up the specific study about how Airbnbs actually increase property value. Was that something that she brought up? It was part of a presentation. that was reviewed. It was the reference was the Harvard Business Review in 2019, which argued that in aggregate, I'm quoting here, in aggregate, the growth in home sharing through Airbnb contributes to about 1/5 of the average annual increase in U.S. rents and about 1/7 of the average annual increase in U.S. house prices. So this is a study that actually interrogated this question specifically and argued that Airbnb increases the value of properties, both because, one, it allows people to have an alternative source of income, and the second is that when there are buyers on the market who seek to buy properties, being able to rent is considered an added asset for the property. As a result, it increases the value of the property. I think to that point, just like Mr. Hepworth said, he may have somebody who says, I wouldn't live here because you have your neighbors. I know plenty of people who would say, I won't buy this house because I'm not allowed to put it on Airbnb. And so I think that that sort of anecdotal evidence, while important, doesn't really prove the key point of the harm that they're referring to. Again, there are a lot of points that I think I tried to say up front. Questions about traffic accidents, all conjecture. The fact that there could be 1,560 cars coming in and out. If my wife and I were there every single night, which we're not with our family, 156 cars. If my wife and I were there every single night with our family and we both drive a car and we go to and from every day, that's 730 cars a year instead of 156 cars. So if anything, people who live there full time have actually more driving than having any renters. But again, I could be somebody who has a family with 14 kids and I could have 12 cars, and that would be worse than having people who rent, for 4 nights a month, who may have, some cars as well. Let's see. Let me see where else, because I don't want to sort of reinvent a lot of this stuff. There are these questions about. There was the question about the cars and the party that happened. Again, there are parties that occur constantly. How many times have I or my family been awoken by RVs on the lake, by people screaming on the lake, by there being fireworks on the lake? So the idea that, yes, there was a party that ended at 2:30 in the morning, is that a short-term rental issue? No, because these things happen all the time. And would granting a variance to that prevent those things from happening? No, because we have parties sometimes as well. And again, I think this gets to the core question as to whether or not this is really a question of short-term rental or a question of whoever's in the house and the nature of the property is creating a problem. Let's see here. As I mentioned before, the issues related to fire risk, fireworks, odor, light infiltration are all, I think, ancillary to the core issue and not related to the presence of a short-term renter, excuse me. Mr. Hepworth raised this issue of planning to open to the second floor. 2 points there. The first is that we actually don't have plans to do so right now. We have not filed any documents with the city to suggest that we are going to build. As Mr. Mackey said, we are zoned to do so. We are allowed by septic to do so if we so choose. We don't have a plan right now. The second point is having more bedrooms doesn't necessarily mean that we would have more people. It's not like a ratio. It's not like a 10-3, which is why we chose 10. We chose 10 because we just don't want more than 10 people in the house, regardless of how many bedrooms we have. So even if we were to add bedrooms, that wouldn't change that number. And then the issue of the quasi-hotel, I think that gets more to the heart of the nature of the law, and that term of a quasi-hotel I don't think is a legal one. So I'm not sure that it has a specific importance in the context of this case, and I would argue that interpretation, while you may or may not agree with it, isn't relevant to the specific rule of the law. Issues, fence, lights, property maintenance, as I've mentioned before, I don't think are specifically relevant to this case. The Redmond's concern about public safety, the fact that an accident has happened. The accident happened before there was a short-term rental. I don't know if there's been an accident subsequent to it, and I can certainly say that there's been no evidence to suggest that there's been any accidents related to the short-term rental. There haven't been any instances of fire department or police coming to the house as a result of the short-term rental. And the Redmond Edmonds raised the point about whether or not the short-term rental takes away from the residential character of the area. And this may or may not be true. It's open to interpretation, but it's hard for me to say that, it's hard for me to define what residential character, what neighborliness means. I know it feels like a good thing, and we all want that on some level, but whether or not you can translate that to a frank economic hardship or to proof that there has been a decrement to value, I don't think is a fair thing. There are people who would prefer never to talk to their neighbors, and for them, it would be a hardship to have to talk to their neighbors. So I think that those concepts, while important to many people, are not necessarily relevant to the core of the case tonight. I think the last points that were raised about nature of general health and safety to the community, as I've mentioned before, I don't think that you can point to specifically to the short-term rental, and it could be related to the people who are living there. The notion of people staying within the boundary of the fence or going out to the lake, again, these are public roads, there's public access there. So the idea that if somebody comes onto your property, if I invite my friend over and they go walk on the street, there's absolutely no problem with that. That's not against the law. And I would reiterate that in terms of the point that was raised is like, what was the terminology? The spirit of the ordinance. This idea of the spirit of the ordinance is not to have a transitory community of people who are not invested in the property to that degree. And I think that with the way that we have done this is that we've put different policies in place. We've done, put up the fence and other metrics through Airbnb, including what I learned tonight in terms of the vetting process, that I do not think that we are outside of the spirit of the ordinance. And I would come back and conclude with this concept of, at the end of the day, the question before you is whether or not the short-term rental itself is causing the variance, not the question of what has happened within the people who are living in the property. And I would again raise to you this question of, if I lived in the property and I caused major problems for my surrounding people, and I said to them, you know what, I'm actually going to go move to Florida, I'd rather rent this. And they said that would be a great idea. That is a scenario that would fly in the face of this idea of, because of the smoking, because of the noise issues, and I think that's really the question at play here. I'll conclude there, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Anybody wish to follow through or questions? Mr. Tripp?
Nope.
Is there a reason you don't have a local property manager?
So we have somebody who, so my understanding, and in fact I'm in communication with my wife as well, is that, so we have somebody who helps rent the property and helps maintain the property, and this person, I apologize, I'm on the phone, so I'm reading right here that there's a man who lives close to Derry. I can find out the specific details. I have his name for purpose of public record. I won't state it here, obviously, for the purpose of his privacy, but if you want specific information of who this person is and where they live close to Derry. This person does things like he takes out the trash, he'll do odd jobs if there's something who's needed on site, and he manages snow removal. There's this question of that we didn't remove the snow. That happened 2 days ago, I mean, and the other property, the parking area had been removed, and so, if we went out of town, that would have also, been the same problem. But my understanding in terms of how our arrangement is that we actually do have somebody that's more local.
Does any of your neighbors know this?
No, they don't. Apparently not. Yeah.
Well, it would be neighborly, I think.
It would. You're right. That's 100% right.
I agree that the rental is probably not the cause of the difficulties you have here, but do you have any rental rules that could minimize, some of the activities that are causing the chaos and stress in the community?
I think the issue is, the short answer is yes, but the issue is not whether or not there are rules. The question is how they're enforced.
Well, that's why I ask about the local property manager.
And so what I mean by that is, so we, after December 3rd, when this happened, so it's actually interesting. So we tried to get documentation using the cameras that we have. We have like a Nest camera in our house. We tried to get documentation and proof that there are more than 10 people on the property, but we weren't able to. We didn't have these images. And actually, as a result of this meeting, and now that this is public record, we're going to go back to the people who rented and exact the penalty based off of that. But the way that it works is that we have a penalty after the fact. So if somebody does something and we find out about it, our recourse is after the fact to fine them for something. However, that's no different than, what I would say, what would the recourse be if I was the one having the party and they smelled cigarette smoke or marijuana? They could come over and talk to me, and they could come over and talk to the people who are renting and say, could you please be quiet? They could call the police. So, I think that the rules that we have in place now are less than 10 people. It's, that you have to be quiet by 10 o'clock. And, these are rules that we hope people will, follow, and we put in penalties in place when we have proof that they haven't followed it. Obviously, I'm not going to get up here and say everybody's going to do that, just like we stay up past 10 o'clock and we will sit on our porch and talk about those things. And that also raises the point that, there is a point of like, the dogs are not on the leash and there are more than 12 people and all these things, and I understand that, but, frankly, this is the first time I've heard about a lot of these things, and I don't know what the documentation is. I don't know if there's proof of all of these things. And I think that in cases like this, when you're trying to explicitly raise issues of hardship, there should be a standard for documentation to show that some of the events that were stated to have happened, and that they caused, if there's a financial hardship consideration, documentation that they caused a financial hardship as well.
That's all my questions.
Very good. I mean, you make some good points, but some of the points, a lot of them seem contextually to follow my points to Mr. Hepworth, right, which is and certainly up your point to this board to sort those things out, which are, some of them are conjecture, hyperbole, but also some of them regarding Mr. Hepworth are focus on what you would expect normal life to be when your home is 13 feet away from another home, correct?
Correct.
But there are some other merits to this that the board can reflect on. And I'm not going to speak for everybody else, but I just want to acknowledge your points, and some of them are well spoken.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions for Mr. Miller? No. If you don't have anything else, we can entertain a motion to go into deliberation.
I'll make the motion to go into deliberative session.
And Mr. Burgess makes that motion. Understand that the board doesn't take any more input after this point, and the five members sitting on the case will be deciding and discussing the merits and where we wish to go with it. Mr. Burgess's motion has been made. I need a second, please.
I'll second.
Mr. Ver has a second. That motion is completed. All in favor of going into deliberation, say aye.
I don't think
Aye.
your mic's on.
Any opposed? Hearing none.
I don't think your mic's on.
Anybody wish to speak, start out to the merits of this case?
Well, as I think I said at the beginning, before we started with all of the dialect, that my problem with the situation was that nowhere in our ordinance does it permit the use of Airbnb or any other third-party agency to rent houses without the town even being aware of it.
Looking at, I'd go back to kind of what I said in response to that before, which is you have to look at what type of ordinances we do have, though. And again, when it was written, it might not have been kind of at the mind, but what is there is, a permissive ordinance. And when you look at what's allowed in an LDR, they let you know that you have to go and reference, what we have over in the MDR. And one of the items there, as I look at it, and I know the kind of comment came up of the hotels, quasi-hotels, and whether or not that they are exclusive with this. And, when you look at the transient use of a residential, it means that you've got occupancy for less than 30 days. So just by definition, the transient occupancy is excluded by definition of what a single-family dwelling is for the area. So looking at it that way, it is specifically written into the ordinance. It's just that what's allowed is a single-family house. There's no mention of the hotels except
Right,
for in the industrial area.
Well,
So
you can't get hung up on the definition of what constitutes a,
Hotel.
a renter or an owner or.
But we do have that, which is the 30-day timeline, and the short term being under the 30.
But nowhere in the ordinances is anything addressed about not only Airbnb, but there are other companies that do the same thing, that rent properties.
Right, and where we have those types of rentals permitted are within the industrial district, and I believe my other note over in the central business district or the office district, though, and that's where this type of thing is permitted. So
Right, but those aren't residences.
But those are the short
Those
term.
aren't dwellings.
Right, so that's for my point of where the dwellings are specifically stated that those are for dwellings, and then where the short-term rentals are hotels for that type of transient occupancy, which is really what an Airbnb is, are specifically called out, just not by the term of an Airbnb. And I think it's because, and I know that it's been withheld in other cases where this has come up in the state, is that you can't fault the ordinance for not anticipating a future change. So I think where you kind of have to look at it is not necessarily shoving a square into a circle, but where does it align?
Well, I think at this particular point, I know that who's the executive of the planning board was here for a short time tonight. I'm sure he's kind of getting the flavor and what was happening, because none of it really changed very much. We all came back to the same things. We all agree with it. The trouble is that the town of Derry's ordinance regarding residences has never been upgraded to address the issues of, telephonic reservations like Airbnb, and there are others that do it too.
Yes.
And that's something that the planning board is thinking of at this moment. Well, maybe not tonight, not exactly at this moment, but I think that's something that the planning board has on their schedule, and we can't manufacture something to put into any of our motions.
Right, but again, that's kind of where I'm
Disagreeing, with what's already written.
But I think that's where you have to look at what's permitted in the area, and then is it a permitted use? And there's no rental, like there is no short-term rental, there's no transient occupancy. It's a single-family dwelling is what's allowed. And so there is something, we do have what's permitted.
No. Well, yes, I mean, that's valid. There's no question that that's a valid point. However, what I'm saying is that residency, by merely renting it for 3 days or 1 day or 10 days, arranged by Airbnb, by a phone call, isn't necessarily what it's saying. And as far as a dwelling is concerned, someone who rents it for 10 days or 7 days or 3 days is not a resident. And he doesn't dwell there. They don't dwell there.
Right.
So right now, the planning board is considering their options on that. and I suspect that we'll hear more about it.
Okay. Mr. Burgess, you have any comments?
Well, I'm thinking, in this particular area, it's, most of the things are stacked so close together, there's not much property to fit 10 cars in any place. Because you can have anywhere from a bus to bring everybody in at one time to 5 different cars or even 10 different cars. Just the people coming in, if they invite other people over while they're there, then, you have more cars than you have a place to put them yourself. So it'd be an infringement on the rest of the neighborhood to have that many extra cars. Plus, again, the traffic going into that place, over time, the more traffic you have on those small roads, can become hazardous. It's I don't think it's in the best interest of the neighborhood, to me. Okay?
Mr. Tripp?
Well, the issue, as I see it, is it's not a permitted use. All the uses that are permitted, I think, they typically have rules and regulations associated with them that govern how the business can be operated. Clearly, in this case, we don't have rules and regulations on, how a short-term rental should be operated in the town of Derry. I think what Mr. Burr said is that obviously the planning board is aware of this now, and in the future we might have rules and regulations that manage this type of use. It would seem that if we were to approve this variance, then we would have to manufacture, some rules and regulations as to how this business would be operated, just to preserve the property rights of both the owner and the abutters. So that's my thoughts.
Mr. Corbett, go back to what you were saying a few minutes ago, and is it your position that if I understand what you were saying, which is that the fact that the ordinance doesn't specifically exclude this or name this out, but by the fact that the ordinance specifies what is permitted, is it your position that the ordinance is itself written for what is permitted and establishing that?
Yes, I believe that what the ordinance tells us is what is allowed in each area. And then looking through, short-term rental isn't something that we have really in our throughout here, but we have other things that fit within that, which is a hotel, which is, a bed and breakfast. And I think when you start to look at what then constitutes what is a short-term rental, you look at where is a hotel allowed, where is, a bed and breakfast allowed, which zones are those allowed in? And again, it goes back to what is allowed in this zone, which is where you have a single-family house, not those types of businesses.
And I get the sense that you and Mr. Ver were arguing the same point, but just in different ways.
Yeah.
Is that your concurrence as well, Mr. Ver?
Yes.
Okay.
Hotels and bed and breakfasts are already able to be in a particular zone in the town of Derry, but not in the low-density residential zone. Makes no difference that it's on a lake.
Right. In regards, going over to Mr. Tripp's comments, in regards to the 5 criteria, you have your public interest, spirit of the ordinance, substantial justice, values of surrounding properties aren't diminished, and then hardship. Can you wrap your head around any of those 5 criteria?
Do I have any issues with the property in violation of those?
Yeah, so in regards to public interest, can you make an argument there or adverse to that point? Likewise with spirit of the ordinance and substantial justice. Understanding that your point is that we don't have rules for this. I don't quite remember exactly what you had said a couple of minutes ago, but formulating your decision in regards to the 5 criteria, can you be specific to one of those 5? You don't have to answer it right this second if you want to think about it, but it's up to you.
Let me do some research.
Okay, and I'll come back to Mr. Burgess and your points as well. Mr. Burgess, in regards to 5 criteria, where do you see yourself fitting with your most or least objection to the application?
Well, I don't think it's in the public interest. I don't think it's within the spirit of the ordinance, because it's not there's nothing in the ordinance that says that it's allowed.
Okay.
And substantial justice, I don't think they're going to have a leg to stand on because we have people there. It's going to be. We're not here to enhance the business of someone because they, made a mistake and didn't have the proper inspection done. Or if they did, they should have gone back to the inspector.
So is your argument more to the spirit of the ordinance?
Yeah.
Okay. And your surrounding properties are not diminished in value. And Mr. Miller has been specific to this, which is that the diminishment of property value is speculative, but without specifics. But in their, let me finish phrasing this, in their specific application, they indicate that the surrounding properties are not undervalued because they support other aspects of the community.
I would say a rental, if they were allowed to do the Airbnb rentals, okay, the temporary rentals, their property would the value would go up. I don't know where it would make the property of other properties around it who are not in this system go up. It just doesn't make sense, because now you're going to have all these people coming in and disrupting the property on you. Why would you want to live there? That's just, me.
And that kind of test goes in line with Mr. Hepworth's testimony.
Yeah.
I see. Mr. Tripp, anything following up there? Are we ready to structure a motion?
Well, it would seem that most of the problems to the property being used as a short-term rental is that it's not being managed properly. I think that the managed property is once again due to a lack of rules and regulations that set expectations on how the property should be managed. Mm-hmm. I think if, as the abutter said, there are some issues with some of the people that rent the property, and I think that better management of it in the selection of the people that are utilizing the property would eliminate those issues.
So to the rules, are you referring to just as a management best business practice, or the rules as might be set or established by the local legislative and
well, that would be the ultimate goal.
Okay.
I think right now, if we were to approve this variance, like I said, we would have to make some rules that would set expectations on how the property would be managed, which would eliminate the issues with the abutters.
Not to lead you, but could you see yourself falling into a substantial justice argument in that regard?
I would say so.
Yep. Okay. All right. Well, let's go to structure this motion and see if we can wrap up and come to an agreement in terms. We do have a subject to obtaining all state and town permits and inspections. Does anybody have anything else that they would like to, as the motion is constructed in an affirmative and not a negative, are there any other considerations that if this application were to prevail, another condition that the board would want to establish on here?
Well, I'm still troubled by the point, if we do approve it, then we're approving it subject to its present conditions and not being subject to any new rule in the zoning ordinances that would give us permission to do that.
Okay.
I would want.
We can't make up our own ordinances.
I would agree. But if this application were to prevail, I mean, currently we have subject to state and town permits and inspections, which is a normal for this, usually always heads up our conditions. But if this were to prevail, what kind of other conditions would you want to see, if any?
I think appropriate fines for future violations of the zoning ordinance.
Yeah, so I mean, let's think about it like this, and that is the old adage, does it give code enforcement teeth? And to what point do they have to measure that, correct? However, what we also do when we do this is we give the abutters protections that they might want to have in place that can establish a criteria for complaint that code enforcement can follow up on, i.e., no vehicles parked outside of the property. That's something, and therefore, if you ended up with 14 vehicles, again, the code enforcement has something to come back with if there's evidence of it, to be able to say, you violated this and whatever. That's just an example. I don't want to lead the audience. If there's no other conditions, we're ready to move on.
I have a handful.
Mr. Corbett?
Yeah, so I would like to bring forward some conditions that were brought up during the original testimony.
Okay.
One of them, it was mentioned, set quiet hours of 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. I would like to lock that in as something that can kind of change with the listings.
Okay.
You kind of took my thunder on cars only being allowed on the driveway, no street parking.
Yep.
And then I'd also like to enforce limiting the amount of people on property to 10.
Okay. So the hours again were 8 to what?
10 p.m. to 8 a.m.
You have this motion, Mrs. Corbett.
Mrs. Moran.
Mrs. Moran, I'm sorry. I'm a justice of the peace in my...
But I think...
You married half this board at one time.
Aren't those the same conditions, though, that are currently, that B&B tells people?
No, so this is what's listed with the
owner?
with right now, but
Listed in the house.
yes, but they are subject to change. Like the owner could.
So he's in Boston, and nobody calls him, right?
Cambridge.
And so then you have this horror show that goes on.
Well, now outside of the zones, I mean, your alternatives: call the police, call the code enforcement. I mean, you have to call somebody. Again, kind of to the point, even to what Mrs. Quo said at the last meeting. You have to rely on the neighbor, and unfortunately for the neighbors, we see this in a lot of, basically every variance that we pass. We can only enforce what comes to us. I mean, I'm not going to know that people are partying at 6 a.m. I'm probably going to be asleep, I'd hope. But you need somebody to tell you that it's happening to be able to enforce the rules. So what you have to give people is kind of guidelines on when they're allowed to enforce the rules as well. So if somebody's loud at 9 o'clock at night and you're trying to, no offense, but you're trying to sleep outside in the fence, you don't really have a leg to stand on. But if it's 2 in the morning, now you have something specifically to be able to point back at that it's quiet.
We put that on the neighbors, that it's their responsibility then to call the police.
Well, it also comes down to the owners of the property who know if they're continuously
they're in Boston.
right. But if they're continuously outside of these conditions, then the variance is no longer being upheld. They're not meeting the conditions of it.
It's not a matter of of telling the neighbors they have to police, it's telling the neighbors they have recourse. And that's the difference. And understanding that the board is here to keep peace, tranquility, whatever.
Well, I think that requiring that the owner have a local property manager would go a long way towards helping enforce the rules, because then you'd have someone that is somewhat independent that could come out and check, or, contact the owner to say that there's violations occurring.
Yeah, I'm not sure that requiring a property manager, it's up to the board.
Yeah, I have a tough time with that one just because, and I thought through it as well, but where I get tough is the person quits, dies, moves, whatever. Now what happens when you're at a gap between, a property manager? What I would think, and it kind of goes to, I'm trying to think of the exact one that someone's used on us before, and again, it goes back to being neighborly, but I think perhaps it's, the landlord's providing the neighbors with the contact info. This is the contact number of who's managing the property. If you can't get a hold of them, here's our home and cell, please contact us. Perhaps just sharing that with the neighbors helps give some recourse as well, rather than requiring that somebody is on a 24/7 call. But we can't enforce that, but maybe that's just something that happens.
We're going to be here till 10.
Okay. Mr. Corbett, back to the vehicles, you had established what?
The vehicles only to be parked in the driveway. I'm not sure what that number would be, but basically want to forbid street parking.
Okay. Now you have overflow onto the septic hill, or onto the septic system, and that's hard to police. But I think that limiting the amount of vehicles there permanently is certainly worthwhile.
And if we're going to put a limit at 10 people total, is it 5 vehicles?
Okay. Very good. Anything else?
That might be kind of hard to do. Like I said, you could have 10 separate people.
Right, but when you rent a hotel sometimes, or you get a room for a week, how many parking spots does it come with when you have 4 people? Sometimes you only have 1. I run it.
Well, if you're renting they would give you the parking spaces you needed for those people who are renting the apartments.
Sometimes. I know when I traveled, 6 of us, that you can only get the one spot.
When I lived in Lawrence, there was no parking. Right. You had to find your own someplace else.
All right, well, let's stop
Another
talking
story,
about Lawrence.
Yeah.
You all
So if
set?
there's any violations of these conditions, then the neighbor's recourse would be to call the police?
Yeah.
Mr. Mackey, how do the police fall into the code enforcement world?
I would say, if it was something that was perhaps breaking the law, maybe to rise to the level of disturbing the peace or those sorts of things. But I think if it involves number of restrictions on how many cars you can have on site, that sort of thing, the police wouldn't get involved with that. It would have to be reported, I guess, to our office, and then we would then have to notify the owners, hey, this is being violated, and bring that to their attention, hopefully get that under control, but that sort of thing.
Okay.
So it would be one of these things that, so the neighbors, as a means of, as a recourse of enforcing these conditions, would call the code enforcement office on a weekend, and what would happen then?
On the weekend?
Yes.
No.
Nothing.
Right,
Then,
but so that was kind of the idea, perhaps if phone numbers were passed along outside of just the town offices, the neighbor can contact the neighbor. Lynn owns the house, I call Lynn and tell him, hey, it's loud. Perhaps, as the landlord, he's doing something about it. It's always kind of your recourse. Now, the question about calling the police, the way I would look at it is, when do you call the police on your neighbors?
Well,
on the noise ordinance part, there is a state law. The town of Derry doesn't have one, but state law is at 10 o'clock at night.
It is 9:55.
It is 9:55.
Right, so now we've got Bob calling somebody on Monday, and the conditions that warranted the violation are no longer in existence.
Have I mentioned it's 9:55?
We may need to have an
All right,
extension.
well,
What we're doing is we're establishing recourse for the neighbors. This is, if you were to vote yes on this, and Mr. Miller and Ms. Quo received 3 yeses, and it prevails, these are conditions that are set with it. And it gives the neighbors recourse as opposed to just saying yes, applicable to all town and state permits and inspections.
you've convinced me.
All right.
I'll vote no, but you've convinced me.
Well,
We haven't got to that point yet.
Chair, we have 4 minutes left. Would you like to make a motion to extend
Well,
an
let's
hour and 2
vote.
more minutes?
well, let's see if we're all set. Are you all set?
I'm all set.
Folks all
I'm
set
good to
down the
go.
line? All right, very good. So with that, we are ready to come out of deliberation. I could have a motion for that, please?
Oh, I'll give you the motion to get out of deliberative session.
Thank you.
I'll second it.
All right, Mr. Tripp has a second, so that means he's on board. And all in favor of coming out of deliberation, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Mrs. Moran, you have a motion to read.
Okay.
One quick question. For the cars, do you want it to say cars only to be parked in the driveway and limit it to no more than 5 cars?
No, we don't have control over that. We can limit
just
5
limit.
vehicles only.
Perfect, thank you. I make a motion on case number 23-103, Peter Miller and Elizabeth Quo, to grant a variance to the terms of Article 6, Section 165-48.a of the Town of Derry zoning ordinance to allow the property dwelling to be utilized for short-term rentals at 67-69 Connolly's Grove Road, parcel ID 16052 and 16053, zoned LDR, as presented with the following conditions. We have 4. The first is subject to obtaining all state and town permits and inspections. 2, set quiet time from 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. 3, limit the vehicles to no more than 5. 4, limit to 10 people occupying the property. And that concludes the motion.
May I have a second, please?
I'll second.
No, sorry, Mr. Chair. I want to make a correction there. I don't think we want to make it to occupying at 10, because that still opens up the unlimited guests. I think we want to leave it as
Limit to 10 people.
10 people within the property.
So I
I'll
would
take my second,
So how did you read that?
limit to 10 people occupying the property, but I want to strike occupying the property.
Mr. Corbett, how did you phrase that?
10 people just within the property, 10 people allowed on the property. Because I think where it runs,
Yep.
yeah, I know we're running out of time, but we're also at 9:59 and 30 seconds, so I'd like to make a motion to extend.
That's fine, 10 minutes, please.
Make a motion to extend 10 minutes. Can I have a second?
I'll second it.
It's like seconded by the whole entirety.
It was a voice blur, I'm not sure who
Alan.
has it. Mr. Perez, a second, thank you. Limit to 10 people,
Within the property.
Want to say
Okay.
adults rather than people?
what's that?
You want to say adults rather than people?
No.
No, I'm concerned about, I want to amend that quiet hours as well, the 10 PM to 8 AM.
7:55 p.m.
No. What does quiet hours stand for? What does it represent?
No excess noise.
Quiet hours, 10 PM to 8 AM.
And that was also taken from the current rule, the current listing of the property where the rules are quiet hours of 10 PM to 8 AM. I think it's just an implied, when you have quiet hours, the party has to be over, no partying, no yelling, no raves, no fireworks. It's pretty inclusive of being quiet.
Is that on the Airbnb app?
That would be listed as one of your conditions, yeah, when you,
Is that on the app?
I can look it up right now.
I just want to know.
It would show you, yes, the quiet hours are listed within the Airbnb app. So when you go to book your property, much like how we list conditions, all of the conditions are listed there before you rent it.
10 p.m.
Quiet hours?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, per Airbnb app is my amendment.
But it's not Airbnb's. That's why I want to put it in, because it's not Airbnb's decision. The owners can change it at any time on Airbnb. I want to take that away. I want us to put a rule in where they have to follow
understand
us.
that.
Yeah, but saying per the Airbnb app, we'll be putting that. I don't know. Airbnb doesn't run the quiet hours.
What? I don't,
I don't think we need the per the app, per the Airbnb. I don't think that needs to be included.
I don't,
Rental rules? Could we say rental rules?
It's not on the Airbnb app.
Not the
If you listed it is.
I see, okay, fair enough, okay. All right. No excessive noise. Okay. Excessive noise. That should be number 2. It's included with the quiet hours, so it's more specific. I'm fine with that. My amendment for no excessive noise and Mr. Corbett's amendment, limit to 10 people within the property. All in favor of those amendments, the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, that passes. Therefore, the motion is completed, and to the finding of fact, the board to this point has expressed safety concerns, or the finding of fact, a case 23-103, the application for short-term rentals for less than 6 months. Short-term rentals are currently allowed in the Central Business District and Office Business District. The zoning district is low-density residential. The applicant noted this was not their primary residence, and the board has heard testimony concerning safety and preservation of property. Are there any other points, the finding of facts, that anybody wishes to add? All in favor of the finding of fact, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none. All in favor of moving the motion for a vote, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none. Let's poll the board. Mr. Corbett?
I vote no. The 2 reasons that had jumped out at me was the spirit of the ordinance. As I've mentioned kind of throughout, I think it spells out what is allowed, and I do feel that this goes against it, as well as the hardship. I think there are other uses for the property outside of short-term rentals. I don't think the hardship exists.
Very good, thank you. Mr. Burr?
I'm going to vote yes.
All right, Mr. Burgess?
I'm going to vote no. I don't think it's in the public interest or the spirit of the ordinance.
Very good, thank you. Mr. Tripp?
I'm going to vote no for 2 reasons. Since it's not a use of the district, and the other is because it's contrary to public interest, because I believe people in residential areas have a right to enjoy their property, and I don't believe that the conditions that are set are enforceable.
All right. The chair will vote no as well. I'm concerned about the public interest only primarily because of transient of occupants. I can concur in the value of understanding your neighbor and being able to approach them and work out difficulties. And I think with short-term renters where there's conflict, I see that isn't a benefit to that aspect. I also have a concern with hardship. I don't concur with the hardship on this. This is a neighborhood that had a home, that have residential homes, and my concern is that the Airbnb does in fact turn this into a commercial atmosphere and takes away from the preservation of the neighborhood. I, like my comments on the finding of fact, the board has discussed public safety, and I concur with that as well. So, Mr. Miller, sorry to let you know that the application has failed. You, of course, have recourse asking this board for rehearing on points of merit within 30 days. After that, recourse would be to Superior Court.
Thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you. All right. Other business, we have no other business other than the bi-monthly Town and Country magazine. We do not have any correspondence. We need approval of the minutes from February 16th, 2023. Can I have a motion on that, please? Did everyone have an opportunity to change the draft and look at it?
I wasn't here.
Okay. Any conflicts with the draft as it's presented?
Look good during my once over, Mr. Chair, so I'll vote to approve as submitted.
Very good, thank you.
And I do have another action item after.
Okay, very good. Mr. Corbett makes a motion as presented. A second, please.
I'll second it.
Very good, thank you, Mrs. Moran. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Very good. Minutes pass. Mr. Corbett, you had something?
Yeah, Mr. Mackey had passed out to us last week. Just a reminder, the New Hampshire Municipal Association is doing the local officials hybrid workshops, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. virtually on Thursday, April 6th, or on Thursday, June 1st. It's free to all members. It's highly encouraged that we attend one of these two sessions.
Very good, thank you. Any other business for the board beyond that? Everybody all set? With that being said, we have any cases lining up?
Not yet. I've talked to a few people that may submit. We do have another week to go.
Okay, so we have a meeting for first week in April, but the second week.
20th is got a council conflict.
All righty, so we don't know if we have cases for April 5th.
Cutoff's Wednesday for April 5th,
Okay, so
Next
that being the case, we need to take a motion on,
the 20th.
Okay.
help me out there.
Is it to move the date or to move the location to another room?
And no meeting on the 20th, I believe.
Yeah, so here's the conflict, right, is that we can't use this room on the 20th, we get bumped. And so we can have the meeting in another location. However, depending on what we have for applicants, that could be kind of an issue. So we can either vote to postpone that 20th,
No meeting on the 20th due to
or we can,
Conflict.
you can leave it up to the
Scheduling
chair
conflict.
to determine based on the caseload.
I would leave it to the chair to determine on the caseload.
Okay? That meet with you folks?
Yes, we'd have to coordinate with cable, see if we could find a room.
If we have a joint meeting, we wouldn't be able to, because we do have one of those out there.
Well, we'll leave it to the chair. Very good. I need a motion for that.
I'll make a motion to leave it to the chair.
I'll second it.
All right, very good. All in
Corporate
favor
world
of
I'm not
leaving
putting
it
that in the minutes. I'm not putting that in the
Pass it to
minutes.
the left.
Say
I'll
aye.
say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Who's out?
Nay.
Very good.
Motion. And second was?
Crystal did. All right. Other than that, we have no further business this evening.
Happy St.
We can
Patrick's
take a
Day.
motion for adjournment.
And I got my tongue tied. Let's adjourn this thing.
Motion to adjourn.
Second that one, too.
Thank you. All in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you. Have a
Hey.
good evening.
Yeah.
Mr. Ed says